All right. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to call the House Judiciary meeting to with the witnesses. As we set the precedent on Tuesday, we are going to be limiting testimony to 5 minutes apiece. I will give you a 30-second notice as to when your 5 minutes is about to expire, and then I will start interrupting. And so, because I want to try to be fair to everyone who is seeking to testify, and to give everyone equal time, and then to, but not to. And to try to finish in some sort of reasonable time frame, because I can guarantee you that after listening to hours of testimony, we will all start to, we're human beings, we'll start to lose attention, so I want to try to be as fair as we can. We will take questions from members of the committee first, and then we do have some folks that are here that are not standing members of the Judiciary Committee, and we will accept questions from those individuals as well. So with that, we have a schedule that we have set with folks that are going to be invited to testify today, and we will start with Dr. Karen SHEEHAN and Glenn KEEFER. Dr. SHEEHAN's with the Lurie Children's Hospital, and Mr. KEEFER is with the Restaurant Association. So if you'd come up, I still need you to identify yourselves for the record before you as you're introducing yourself, and we will move on from there. So, yeah, sorry, you'll just need to push the button until the green light comes on.
Okay. I'm Karen SHEEHAN. I'm a pediatric emergency medicine physician at the Ann and Robert H. Lurie Children's Hospital of Chicago, formerly Children's Memorial Hospital. Lurie Children's treats children from throughout Illinois, and our patients face life's most complex health issues, including cancer, organ failure, and other rare medical concerns. In many ways, the problem of violence is more complex than any of these health conditions. Violence prevention requires many different partners working in synergy using many different strategies. At Lurie Children's, we feel we have a responsibility to apply our multidisciplinary expertise and resources to advance the well-being of children within and beyond the walls of the medical center by working to solve exactly this type of problem. Thus, we have convened Strengthening Chicago's Youth, or SCHI. SCHI facilitates collaboration among hundreds of service providers, researchers, advocates, policymakers, and other stakeholders around a public health approach to violence prevention. This approach, which is encouraged by the CDC, involves adopting consistent messaging about the preventability of violence, promoting use of evidence-based violence prevention strategies, and fostering multi-sector collaboration. There is no single measure that will solve the violence problem, but Lurie Children's and SCHI believe that it is critically important that Illinois continue to have strong restrictions on carrying concealed firearms. Despite the hope that allowing individuals to carry weapons in public would deter crime, various research shows that laws allowing concealed carry are associated with an increase in aggravated assaults. Last year, I advised a student in medicine and public health on a project to analyze cases from the Violence Policy Center's Concealed Carry Killers database, which has compiled news reports of homicides and suicides committed by concealed carry permit holders nationwide. We made several important findings. In more than 1/3 of the cases, the victim and shooter were intimate partners or family members. In 30 out of 34 cases involving intimate partners, women were the victims. The shooters were found to be committing a crime nearly as often as the victims. The vast majority of the victims were unarmed, and nearly 1/4 of victims were shot in their own homes. Our findings suggest that many violent incidents involving concealed carry permit holders do not involve self-defense. But beyond this important research, I know firsthand from working in a children's hospital for 24 years how dangerous it would be to allow people to carry concealed weapons in our hospital or on our campus. When parents come to Lurie Children's, they are facing one of the most devastating situations a parent can imagine, the serious illness or injury of a child. Emotions are heightened, and parents may become uncharacteristically aggressive with the people caring for their children. We have policies and excellent security personnel to handle these events in a calm, respectful manner. But if a parent were allowed to be armed, it would endanger our staff and our patients. Thank you for holding this important hearing. Everyday children are affected as victims, perpetrators, witnesses, family members, and friends by tragic shootings that are entirely preventable. We urge the General Assembly to take strong, immediate action to keep the children and families of Illinois safe. Thank you.
Good morning,
Thank you.
ladies and gentlemen of the House Judiciary Committee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify this morning. My name is Glenn KEEFER. I'm managing partner of KEEFER's Restaurant in Chicago and a board member of the Illinois Restaurant Association, and I am here to testify on behalf of the association opposing concealed carry in our restaurants. Proponents of the concealed carry claim that concealed carry permit holders are the most law-abiding citizens in this state. They say this fact guarantees that concealed carry in bars and restaurants adds an extra level of protection and makes us safer. I could not disagree with this more. A patron with a gun should not be allowed in any establishment that sells liquor. This includes more than bars. It encompasses any restaurant where the sale of liquor is an incidental activity. Under no circumstances should a person be allowed to carry a gun in a restaurant that possesses any sort of liquor permit. I do not want to live in a state where I have to ask people to see their ID when they order a drink and their gun permit when I notice that they are carrying a gun. I do not believe this would make me, our staff, or our guests any safer. Furthermore, I think it's absurd that the presence of alcohol is the only reason concealed carry should not be allowed in our restaurants. Any restaurant on private property must have the right to deny any patron the ability to carry a gun on premise, regardless of whether that restaurant serves alcohol. Restaurant owners should not have to fear losing autonomy over their restaurant and the land associated with it. This extends to adjacent property, including parking lots. A good concealed carry bill must not be concerned only with protecting the rights of gun owners, but also with protecting the safety of our people. I believe a sensible bill must keep guns out of our restaurants. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much. Are there questions from members for this panel? Representative Rebeletti.
I guess the question for both of you is, how do our, if you know, our sister states or other states address concealed carry in hospitals and again in restaurants? I've asked this question of panels before in Springfield, and I'll be asking them of everybody that comes up here, because again, I've traveled out of state and I haven't even thought about the concealed carry issue when I've gone into a restaurant. I've been to hospitals out of state and never thought about it. I'm not sure what the laws were, but I wonder if you know, and I'm sure your associations deal with that issue elsewhere.
I'm certainly not an expert on concealed carry in every state, but it varies state to state on what hospitals allow, and the laws of that state allow. So some states are stricter than others.
I can't speak for other states. I just think that we have an opportunity here to do the right thing, and it's important for us to do that, regardless of what the other states do. I can't help but think of Officer Richard Francis, who on July 2nd of 2008 was escorting a woman into custody and taking her into the Belmont station, and she took his gun from him and shot him dead. A 27-year veteran of the Chicago Police Department. I just think that more guns is not good, and people who are trained to use them have difficulty controlling them. How can we expect people that are not trained to use them to handle them, especially when they're in an environment where alcohol is being served?
I want to make sure that if we have any carve-outs, any exceptions, that we have a rational basis for doing that. And that's why I'm looking to other states, since we're the only state without concealed carry, as to how they've addressed the issue, is to, I think, help all of us kind of determine how this should be fashioned.
We would be happy to research that and get back to you.
Thank you. Any other members with questions for this panel? Great. Thank you very much. We appreciate your testimony today. So we're going to, I know there's some folks in the audience who are not expecting to testify till later, but I think we're going to call you up now since the folks that we're on scheduled to testify at this time are not here yet. So if I can call up the Moms Demand Action, which is Christine FENNO, Sheila Raja, and Amy Steiner. And again, as you start your testimony, if you'd identify yourself for the record, that would be helpful. And there's a green button on the microphone. You need to make sure it's lit up when you start to speak.
Good morning. Hello, my name is Amy Steiner. I became aware of this hearing due to an organization called Moms Demand Action. I want to thank you for the chance to speak on this extremely important topic. I'm a former Chicagoan and now live in Naperville, Illinois. My background is in nursing and in healthcare technology. I have one child, he's 2, and it's because of my precious son and my family experience growing up that I'm here today. I'm sorry, I'll try to compose myself.
It's quite all right. Take your time.
The most formative event of my childhood was one that devastated our family and made me question the measures that we have collectively taken to protect our children and our neighborhoods from gun violence. I was raised in Naperville. My mother was the daughter of Arnold R. Smith, a former mayor of Moline, Illinois. My father was a smart and hardworking man, a former special ops soldier in the military, who then went on to work as a civilian, honorably discharged for John Deere. He considered himself a responsible gun owner, skilled and knowledgeable in gun safety and handling. During the recession of the 1980s, my father lost his job. My parents began having marriage problems. My father, facing mounting financial pressures, spiraled into a severe depression. My sisters and I were 6, 9, and 11, and 13 years old. In a moment of rage one night, he led my mother at gunpoint outside the house, made her drive to a rural road in the Chicago suburbs. There he held her hostage for hours, threatening a murder-suicide. Thankfully, she talked him out of it. They drove home, and in the morning, they called us into their bedroom to tell us something terrible had happened, but they didn't share those details at that time. My father took us to Sunday school, returned to the house, and then packed a bag and left. My mother immediately filed a police report, and a warrant was issued for his arrest. We went into hiding as a family, endangering the friends and the relatives who gave us shelter, while my father managed to purchase yet a second gun and began looking for us. That terrifying week ended with my father committing suicide. You know, it amazes me that despite a warrant out for his arrest, this was clearly a dangerous person. My father was able yet to purchase another gun. I'd like to point out that all gun owners believe that they are, in fact, responsible, but not every one of them is. While walking or driving around armed, it could be their error or a moment of erratic behavior that could end an innocent life. Conceal and carry laws make public places less safe for children, their parents, and first responders who come into contact with so-called responsible gun owners, who should never have gotten their hands on a gun in the first place, people like my father. We've decided as a society that concealed weapons on planes are clearly unsafe. Same for our courtrooms and government buildings. Isn't it true that the elected officials of Illinois would not feel safe in this room with a bunch of armed citizens here? We all went through a scanner on our way in. Then why allow concealed weapons in supermarkets, neighborhood parks, or theaters? How is that in the best interest of our public safety? You know, I was sharing my testimony with my mother, and she said, well, you know, you remember when we went to Disney World, and that was about 7 months before my father committed suicide and threatened my mother and our family. She's like, you know, he felt it was necessary to carry a gun at Disney World. And I just kind of wonder, is that the world we're headed toward, where parents need to arm themselves to go to places like the happiest place on earth? If Illinois must enact a conceal and carry law, then at minimum, I urge you to put the following measures in place, and we feel that these are very practical and reasonable measures. A new system stipulating that only local law enforcement will issue a permit. Local law enforcement has a better understanding of their community and should be the ones determining who receives a carry permit. Universal background checks are needed for all gun sales and transfers. Let's fix the background check
Ms. Steiner,
system.
30 seconds left.
Sorry.
Okay.
Let's fix the background check system to address records of and prohibit purchasers that are not in the system. We need to keep guns out of the hands of people who shouldn't have access to them. At this point, I think I would like to turn the rest of the discussion over to my colleagues from Moms Demand Action. Thank you.
Very good, thank you.
Hi, it's wonderful. It's an honor to be here today. My name is Dr. Sheila Raja. I'm a clinical psychologist and assistant professor. I'm also the author of Overcoming Trauma and PTSD. I am a member of Moms Demand Action, and most importantly and most sacred in my life is that I'm a mother of 2 little girls. I am asking you today, I'm going to keep this short and sweet. I'm going to ask you that this decision that you take, this very important decision, be guided by 2 things. First of all, the dry side of me says a strong evidence base, based in sound public health research. States with more guns have more shootings. We do have that data. And states with conceal and carry do not have fewer shootings. So what I'm asking you to do is look at the longitudinal evidence. Policy should not reinforce the status quo. It should reduce the epidemic of violence. It should make us safer. It should make us as parents, as mothers, as dads, as grandparents feel safer. And the other thing, and we don't have that data right now that it makes us safer. We can be a beacon in Illinois. We can do the right thing. I think you've heard that. The other thing is compassion for victims. I'm a trauma psychologist. This is my life. I've had the great privilege of working with families torn by violence. And when people open their hearts to you, it's a sacred responsibility. And we throw the word resilience around a lot. We like to say, those moms, those dads, in months, in years, in weeks, everyone's going to be better. And you know what? It's not. When people are torn by trauma, by violence, by gun violence, it leaves them broken. It leaves them broken not only in terms of mental health, depression, trauma, anxiety, PTSD, but also even long-term, and I'm happy if anyone wants to email me later for some of this data, even in terms of their physical health symptoms. We break people with this epidemic of violence. So the next time we hear a story on the news about a shooting, I hope we remember that this isn't just, a story. This is a family and their whole life and the radiating impact of that violence. So I hope that you guys today think of 2 things: strong public health evidence base, and then the next thing is compassion for how this really breaks people's lives. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Christine FENNO, and I'm the Chicago Area Co-Director of Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense in America. Our chapter, 2,300 members strong, is the largest in this national volunteer organization, and our moms are fired up. Thank you for hearing our feedback on concealed carry legislation. Members of Moms Demand Action are no longer concealing our passion for keeping our children safe or concealing our outrage at a system that is failing us. Failing us how? By indulging an industry that prefers the most easy, immediate access to their product, guns. My fellow moms came with me here today to demonstrate that. Extremist consumers of the gun industry are not your only constituents. Far from it. I'm a stay-at-home mom raising twins, age 4, with my husband. And like every fellow parent I know, I expect this body of lawmakers to make my family more safe, not less safe. All the children in Illinois deserve safety outside the home as well as inside. No parent I know, and I know many parents, as I'm sure you do, wants their children around people with guns unless those guns are safely stored. Especially strangers walking the street who have not been tested on skill in handling or authorized to carry a concealed weapon for a legitimate reason. This week, when I read that the president of the NRA has a son in prison for a road rage shooting, a man presumably raised to revere gun safety, I immediately thought, my state is about to sanction and condone armed drivers sharing the roads with me and my kids buckled up in back. Many drivers get testy and impatient, and we are okay with guns in the mix? I also read news of a man shot in a hardware store parking lot this week when someone else's firearm accidentally discharged, and I thought, I'm with my kids in store parking lots all the time. Why is a gun being carried on a shopping errand? An accidental shooting took the life of my friend Jen's 5-year-old stepson. He found a loaded gun indoors that wasn't safely stored, and 3 years later, her family has only begun
to recover from that devastating loss. It never had to happen. Mistakes by adults caused that child's death because a gun was in the wrong place. Guns in the wrong place threaten the safety of all of us. Now, if Illinois must enact a concealed carry law, I ask that you act sensibly and please name a thorough list of spaces, public spaces, as the wrong place for guns. Schools, houses of worship, supermarkets, banks, theaters, libraries, playgrounds. And at minimum, I urge you to include the following measures to make it a truly strong law that improves our level of safety in Illinois. 1, please mandate strong training requirements for a carry permit. It makes sense that a person needs both range and class training if they plan to carry a gun in public to reduce the likelihood of innocent people being killed. Applicants for a carry permit should show a legitimate need. California and New York have concealed carry laws that are upheld in court as not infringing on Second Amendment rights, and in those states the law includes the common sense caveat that you must prove in writing a legitimate reason or threat that justifies your need for a permit. We need to designate that only law enforcement can issue a carry permit. We need universal background checks for all gun sales and transfers, and let's fix the background check system to address the records of prohibited purchasers that are not in the system. We need to keep guns out of the hands of people who should not have access to them. And we need to title guns like cars as an effort to keep guns from entering the illegal market, and we must hold anyone who allows their gun to be used in a crime accountable. That's common sense. In closing, I want to ask the House to pass a ban on high-capacity magazines and assault weapons, as well as banning large quantity purchases of guns and ammunition, including gun show and internet purchases. Please put public safety first. I understand the countless considerations and opinions that you're weighing as you legislate this issue. Please don't forget, countless hard-working parents in Illinois have had enough of gun violence. It threatens and destroys families every day. We need your help. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd ask the audience to refrain from any kind of demonstrations at all or any kind of audible comments during the remarks. We're going to, everyone will be treated respectfully as they're speaking, and everyone is entitled to speak without interruption. Are there questions from members? Representative Tapetti, followed by Representative Rebelletti.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ladies, good morning, and thank you for being here on this very important issue. I just want you to be aware of the position that I believe that we're in as a legislature. The Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals has ruled that we must, it's not a may issue, we must pass some legislation that addresses conceal and carry. So clearly the issue is coming up with something that's reasonable.
Yes.
And I take Representative Phelps at his word as an honorable man that he will work with us to come up with something that's reasonable. So you've set forth things that you believe are reasonable. I think what would be very helpful is if you come up with documentary evidence, something, statistics, something to provide to him so that he can see that your requests are in fact reasonable. Because if you're unable to provide that with some support, I think you can kind of see where I'm going. That it may be a little bit difficult to actually add that in or at least consider it. So again, I thank you for this morning for coming, and please do that as soon as possible.
We will.
Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Rebelletti.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think all of you have mentioned, if not most of you have mentioned, that local law enforcement should be the people that are issuing the permits. Who do you think those local law enforcement individuals should be? Should that be the sheriff of each county, or is that I'm from Elmhurst, so the chief of police of Elmhurst should issue? Who would issue those, first of all?
I believe the municipality. So if you're from Elmhurst, the police chief of Elmhurst. There may actually be recommendations that the sheriff is better, but the local municipality, the local police department is going to have a better sense of that community and who's who and what the needs of that community are.
And what would the framework be for each? Think about it this way. If we went by sheriff, you'd have 102 different sheriffs issuing. If you went by municipality, you're going to have hundreds, thousands of individuals issuing. And what would the criteria be for the local law enforcement agent to determine if a person should receive a permit?
Well, I mean, I think that's for the legislature to determine, to set the standards for what is the safest across the board standards. Yeah.
And I appreciate that, and that's another, I think, what Representative Tepetti was talking about, which is, well, that's an idea that can be discussed. You have to have the rational basis again as to
Yep.
what should be there. And I can appreciate criminal background checks and with mental health background checks, but then after that, my concern is how subjective it becomes, and then we'll
Versus
have
objective,
lawsuits where the chief of police of Elmhurst is sued because of whatever the reason is. So if we did craft it that way, we'd have to have, obviously, certain bullet points as to what the rules are so that each individual would be able to follow it.
I understand.
Thank you.
Thank you. I need to add Representative Turner to the roll and Representative Durkin for some questions.
Just a comment, and I understand your request about having it made on a local decisions. We are still have to live within the framework of the Seventh Circuit opinion, which, as you know today, that the appeal en banc appeal was denied. So there's really only one avenue left for the Attorney General to take it to the Supreme Court, or we are going to live with this. Now, we have to live with this, but remember, the opinion, they make discussion of the New York law, which is what I think you made reference to, and read the opinion, because I believe Judge Posner not only is critical of it, but outright rejects the New York law. And I don't believe, I'm not going to predict where I'm going to go on this, but I think that we should not go too far down the road to talk about having it based on a local basis or having a sheriff or a chief of police, because we are going to have to live with forming a law that we believe is going to be consistent with what the Seventh Circuit has stated in the Moore versus Madigan opinion. So this is just my thought, and to all the members of the panel, is that read the opinion again, and you'll see that the New York law does not satisfy the Seventh Circuit's opinion. So I think that I said this a few days ago, if we're going to do something, let's do it right.
Yep.
Because I don't want to have to come back every year and a half. Because when the Seventh Circuit says this does not comply. So I understand, and I really appreciate all your testimony today. It's a very emotional issue.
May I ask about the appeal process? Will there be a rehearing of the decision?
No, what happened is that the Attorney General made a request that the full panel would take up take up the opinion, or they would at least have another bite at the apple to see whether or not they can reverse the decision. Now, the process is there has to be the en banc proceeding. Somebody jump in if they're wrong, because I haven't done federal appeal work, but there has to be a decision by the majority to take the matter up before they rule on the substantive nature of it. Today, they rejected taking it up for consideration.
Okay.
So the only avenue left is to bring the matter before the United States Supreme Court, and I'm not sure what the time frame is, for the state to be able to file that appeal.
Okay.
Otherwise, the Seventh Circuit opinion will be the law of the land. So we'll know soon after that. So,
Okay.
Anyway, I just want you to know that, but I do appreciate your testimony. It's our decision. We have to find a law that's going to be reasonable, that we believe is safe, but also is consistent with what this opinion states about the Second Amendment.
Thank you. We appreciate you hearing us today, and if you can just embrace this opportunity to make the law as strong and reasonable as possible. Thanks.
Any other questions from members? All right, seeing none, I appreciate your being here today and your testimony. We are going to proceed with some folks that weren't up for a while yet, but if Jeannie Wren and Jordan Matches could come on up, and we'll hear from them. All right, so we're going to wait on one more person on that panel. President PRECKWINKLE, whenever you've had a chance to catch your breath, but I am going to be asking you to stick to a 5-minute time limit. I'll give you a 30-second notice when your 5 minutes is about to be up. Thank you very much. You need to put your green light on.
Thank you very much. My name is Toni PRECKWINKLE, and I'm president of the Cook County Board. Chairman Neckrist, Vice Chairman Williams, and Minority Spokesman Rebelletti, I appreciate the opportunity to testify before your committee this morning. I was a school teacher on the south side of Chicago for 10 years, and I'm a past president of the Illinois Council Against Handgun Violence. I've seen firsthand what gun violence can do to families and what it's done to neighborhoods throughout Cook County. And unfortunately, what it's done to too many patients who come through the emergency room at Stroger Hospital for treatment. This committee has an extraordinarily important job to do in the next few months, addressing the conceal and carry issue in a manner that is responsible for all parts of our state. Consequently, I respectfully ask you to consider the following factors as you continue to deliberate this issue. First, please consider the findings of the April 2012 management audit of the State Police's administration of the Firearm Owners Identification Card Act. This audit contained many findings, including the fact that the current FOID card application fee does not fully cover the cost of the FOID card program, in particular the costs of a comprehensive background check. If a person applies for a FOID card, he or she should pay an application fee that reflects the total cost of the card and the comprehensive background check. And the fee for a FOID card should be revisited yearly to account for the increased costs of background checks and to ensure that no other line item in our state budget is reduced to pay for the additional costs associated with the FOID card program administration. Every time a person with a valid FOID card seeks to purchase or transfer a weapon to another individual, a comprehensive background check should be performed on the person seeking to own that weapon. We must ensure that our laws prohibit those with mental illness and serious criminal convictions from purchasing or possessing a weapon. There should also be an updated universal database accessible to law enforcement personnel across the state of Illinois. Our sheriffs and police departments deserve a system that allows them to easily verify who is qualified under the law to carry a firearm. Any legislative proposal must contain the provision that if your gun is lost or stolen, the owner of record has the legal responsibility to report that loss or theft within a prescribed period of time to both the state and local law enforcement officials. A stringent requirement that mandates comprehensive training and safety program that is certified or approved by both the Illinois State Police and the sheriff of the county in which the applicant lives should be part of any bill that is considered. Those on both sides of the conceal and carry debate should support all 6 of these suggestions. At the most basic level, these suggestions say that you should pay for a background check for the privilege of owning a firearm. If you lose your weapon or it's stolen, you should be required to notify law enforcement, and you should be highly trained to handle a weapon. The topic of conceal and carry is one that garners strong emotions and debate. I believe if we can agree on anything today, it's the state of Illinois is exceptionally diverse. While some solutions to an issue may work in one area of the state, they may not be practical in another. It is from that premise that I offer the suggestions on this issue. I acknowledge the ruling of the 7th Circuit Court of Appeals on conceal and carry, and I ask you to consider the following when crafting legislation. Elementary, secondary, and higher education buildings should be gun-free zones. Instead of simply being a location where our children and young adults go to learn, schools are a place where many of our children go to eat their only meals of the day, receive basic health care, and spend time after school because they have working parents or guardians. If any place within our community should be free of weapons, it is our schools. Government-owned and operated buildings should be gun-free zones. Weapons should not be carried at city council, school board, or county board meetings. They should not be allowed where judicial proceedings are being held, where custody determinations are made, or near criminal proceedings. One should not be allowed to possess a weapon in a hospital or a nursing home. Houses of worship should be gun-free zones. Business owners and managers should be allowed to prohibit firearm possession within their establishments by
President Preckwinkle, we've got
appropriately
30 seconds left, so.
notifying patrons. I'm almost done. Good. All home rule units of local government should maintain the ability to determine other appropriate firearm restrictions consistent with the law. I appreciate the opportunity to testify before this committee, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have. And before I conclude, I want to acknowledge the presence of my own state representative, the Majority Leader, Barbara Flynn Curry.
Welcome, Madam Majority Leader. Thank you, Madam President. Representative Zaleski.
Thanks for coming and your testimony, Madam President. If I'm not mistaken, the Cook County Board enacted a lost and stolen ordinance. Isn't that accurate?
Yes, correct.
Can you briefly describe what it did?
It required prompt notification of lost, stolen, or transferred weapons. We had a delayed institution of the law to give the sheriff an opportunity to figure out how that he wished to implement it.
And when that ordinance passed, was it bipartisan in nature? Did it have any no votes?
My recollection, it was unanimous.
Thank you, Madam President.
Representative Welch.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, Madam President.
Good morning.
Thank you so much for being here and taking time out of your busy schedule to testify before us. I think your presence here alone indicates how heavy this decision is for us to make. I represent the 7th House District, which is made up of all West Suburban Cook. Well, not all of West Suburban Cook, but my district is all West Suburban Cook. And so that falls under your jurisdiction in the Cook County Board. And I note in your statement you didn't mention anything about mass transit. Forest Park is in the center of my district, and the Forest Park CTA stop is extremely busy on any given day of the week. Do you or the Board of Commissioners have a position on allowing firearms on mass transit?
Well, it's not something that I referred to in my remarks. I would surely be opposed to firearms possession on mass transit systems.
Thank you, Madam President.
Representative Williams, followed by Representative DePetty.
Thank you, Madam President, for being here today. I appreciated the points that you made. Just a quick comment. We talked on Tuesday about the Auditor General's report that you referenced, and I just wanted to note, there should have been a copy on everyone's desk in Springfield. But we're talking a lot about new proposals and new ideas, and we definitely need to take a look at that. However, the audit pointed out the insufficiencies in the enforcement of many existing laws in terms of those who are not able to carry guns under current law. So again, thank you for reiterating that very important issue.
Thank you.
Representative DePetty.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, Madam President. It's
Good morning.
to see you again. Madam President, you mentioned a little earlier in your remarks that you were abiding by the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals opinion. There was a little bit of uncertainty when we were in Springfield on Monday from your counsel as to the position that you were going to be taking with respect to the viability of that particular holding. Are we now clarified that we are in fact going to recognize the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals in lieu of the decision by the Illinois Supreme Court?
My obligation as President of the county is to execute the laws of the nation, and of course we'll be respectful of the decision made by Seventh Circuit Court. My understanding is that the Attorney General has appealed that decision, and my understanding is that it's a question of whether or not she will continue to pursue that given the decision this morning. If you're asking me whether we enforce the laws of the country, the answer is yes. I would hope, however, that the Attorney General would continue to sue this matter in the federal courts.
No, I can appreciate that, and I guess I was just a little concerned because we were having some discussions in the legislature this week from comments made that were made by the state's attorney from Cook County as to what is actually the law in the state of Illinois. Are we to follow the mandates of the Seventh Circuit, or are we instead to follow specifically the holding of the Illinois Supreme Court?
First of all, I'm not aware of the state's attorney's testimony. I mean, to be honest, I don't know what she said, so it's hard for me to comment on that. We'll continue to look at this, and I presume that this body will come to some conclusions and respond as requested by the federal courts by June 9th. June
Thank you,
9th,
Madam
June 18th? June 9th.
Thank you, Madam President.
Any other questions from, oh, okay, Representative Rebeletti, followed by Representative Drury.
Madam President, thank you for being here. There has been discussion in the past about preempting Cook County, and if we enact concealed carry, which I think we have to do, that some legislators have discussed carving out Cook County or treating it separately. You're not asking for that. You're just asking that we implement the things that you enumerated, the lost and stolen, some other background checks, other things. You're not asking that Cook County be treated differently than the other 101 counties.
There are 102 counties in the state of Illinois. I think there's some unique and special characteristics in Cook County that might indicate that we should exercise our home rule powers in Cook County. So I guess I would answer that given the special circumstances in Cook County, it might be something that we would want to consider.
Thank you very much.
Representative Drury.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Madam President, for taking the time to testify today. I just want to comment on some of the comments you made about the Auditor General's report. It's a lengthy report, and it found massive holes in the implementation and of our FOID card program, saying that it doesn't keep the general public in the nation as a whole safe, let alone the population in Illinois. I recognize you as an outspoken person that people listen to on these issues, and so I just encourage you that as you go forward on this issue, that not only do you continue with the proposals that you put forward today, but that you also ask that there be a delay in any implementation of any law or any issuance of a permit until the Illinois State Police and all of the county clerks throughout the state can certify that they have the processes in place to actually implement the laws that are already in place, because they're not working. So I would just ask that you take that into consideration as you move forward.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other members? All right. Thank you, Madam President, for being here today. So.
Again, Chairman Nekritz and Vice Chairman Williams and Minority Spokesperson Rebeletti, I appreciate your taking time to hear my testimony this morning. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Next, we will hear from Alderman Cochran, and Alderman Osterman. So, if you'd make your way up. Again, we're adhering to a 5-minute limit on testimony. I will give you a 30-second warning, and then we will take questions from members. So if you could just identify yourselves for the record and proceed whenever you're ready.
Alderman Willie Cochran. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen of the committee. My name is Willie Cochran. I'm the alderman of the 20th Ward. For 26 years, I served on the Chicago Police Department, served in the ranks of patrolman, investigator, U.S. Marshal, as well as a supervisor, and in administrative positions. Wrote and changed guidelines in research and development that were based on court directives. And based on that last assignment that I mentioned, I found that whenever the courts make a ruling, municipalities, law enforcement agencies have to make changes in their ordinances, guidelines, and legislation. With that said, and with the order of the court that is in June, we expect to hear. I expect to see that we will be charged with concealed carry as a order of the court. As such, my position at this point, And my concern is that as a result of the concealed carry ordinance and legislation and the orders of the court, I would be more concerned with getting education out and making that part of the issuance of a concealed carry license so that people understand what the laws are in terms of the use of force. Because if we do not do that, we are going to find ourselves in a situation where law-abiding citizens who have no intent of being prosecuted for the illegal use of guns, we will find ourselves prosecuting people for the illegal use of guns without them knowing what use of force really means and when it's authorized to be used. And so I would advise education to be part of the issuance of any license associated with concealed carry. Chicago, Illinois, is a culture that is not astute on firearm possession and concealed carry at this point. In most states where we see this is a common area, it is a historical state that has firearms and firearm education as part of their culture. In Chicago, that is not the case. We have to get there, and I think it is the government's responsibility to do that. I am all for the apprehension and prosecution of people who use illegal guns. I am not supporting concealed carry unless we get education to go along with that. I do support concealed carry if, in fact, we do that. We don't have a choice. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Representative Alderman. You need to put your microphone on. I can't believe you've forgotten so quickly.
I have forgotten. I'm used to sitting on the other side.
Thank you. Now we can hear you.
Friends, I want to thank you and the members of this committee, Minority Leader Riboletti. The issue of gun violence affects all Illinoisans. It's not just a Chicago issue. It's an issue that affects the suburbs, it's an issue that affects downstate, and I think that this committee and the work that you have to do over the next few months to look at the comprehensive laws is something that's very important, and I appreciate the hard work that you're putting into it. I ask, as you endeavor on the issue of conceal and carry, which is something I've fought very hard as I was in the House of Representatives for many years, that you keep in mind the public interest and the public safety of the residents throughout the state of Illinois, especially in those areas that have significant gun violence and death like Chicago. The thing that I want to bring up today, though, is and urge you in this committee to consider is the issue of background checks, which is something I advocated for very strongly. Background checks in Illinois work. Last year, 1,300 times a FOID card holder who went in to purchase a gun was stopped from buying a gun because of an instant criminal background check. 1,300 times that happened. The system is working, stopping people that have mental illness, stopping people that are criminals, people that have orders of protection against them. But the question that you have to pose is how many other times did people go to other markets, to go to the internet, to go to a back alley to buy a gun? And those guns end up in the hands of criminals, they end up in the hands of gang members on the streets of Chicago and other parts of the state. Extending the background check system to all transactions will help keep guns out of criminals' hands, and I think will help keep our state safer. The Tribune last week had a story about individuals that were going across the state border in Indiana to go to gun shows to purchase guns and bring them back and sell them on the south and west side of Chicago to gang members. They had to cross the state, Indiana, because in Illinois we closed the gun show loophole. We did so on a bi-regional, bipartisan basis. And after that happened, the sun came up and people could go to gun shows, but they had to buy a gun going through a background check. That took gun shows off the market in Illinois. Putting a universal background check on all handgun sales and all gun sales in the state of Illinois will help law enforcement focus more on those that are doing the trafficking, and it will stop people by using the background check system, which also then leads to local law enforcement going after those individuals who are illegally trying to buy firearms. Lastly, I will tell you that Superintendent McCarthy will be here later to talk about another law about prosecuting those that are using guns illegally with harder sentences. I will tell you that as an alderman, I've seen directly how a lot of youth have, there are no consequences to their action in taking a firearm and using it. And I think as we can, again, in a bipartisan way, look to penalize those people that are using guns illegally on the streets around the state, I think that will be a great deterrent for gang members picking up a gun and using it in retaliation or on the streets. So with that, I'm proud to be here with you today and look forward to working with you and supporting your efforts in the months to come.
Thank you both. Any questions from members? Representative Sims.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Alderman Cochran, as a former police officer, I'm interested in knowing what your experience has been in tracking illegal guns. As you've arrested various individuals for when they've committed a crime, when you're tracking those guns, how does that process work, and what's been your experience for where those guns have come from?
Well, the tracking of the guns starts, first of all, through the lead system. The lead system is a system that law enforcement uses all over the country, in which you put information in, serial numbers of guns, and it produces information that comes back to you. If that gun is registered, who it's registered to, no matter where it is across the country. That is the first step that is taken in following that chain of guns. The next thing is the Alcohol and Firearms and Tobacco Department also has a way of tracking guns and where that gun is sold to and where who that person should be sold to. Sometimes that's not done, as we know in those programs where we go to gun shows, it's other things like that. But we know who manufactures the gun. We know who it's sold to from the manufacturer through the ATF system. Gun shops are required to give certain information about those people they sell guns to. That information is then delivered to the Alcohol, Firearms, and Tobacco Division. Alcohol, Firearms, and Tobacco, if you are, for instance, a person who is going to be a straw buyer and purchases 10, 15, 20 guns, then it triggers information to ATF. ATF then involves themselves in finding who that person is, what they are doing with that gun, and are able to connect the dots together. Thus, we have a ATF, we have the manufacturer who is responsible for ensuring that that information where that gun is or gun shop is being sold to, and the tracking system that goes along with the lead system. It's just some of the ways that we track these guns. Other times we cannot track the ownership of a gun.
Sure. And thank you so much for that answer, Alderman. And Alderman Osborne, I agree with you. I think we've got to have some discussions about how we're talking about who's buying these guns, because there's this flow of illegal guns on our streets. We've got straw purchasers going into Indiana and Mississippi and coming back and dumping those guns on the south and west sides of Chicago. And I think I agree with you. I think we've got to have some serious discussions about that, and I support that effort. And I want to thank you both for being here. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Representative, I'd like to add this. Most recently, we put a resolution through the City Council asking that we hold hearings on manufacturers of guns putting GPS chips in those guns so that we can track guns like cars, like OnStar. If a gun is stolen, then you should be able to call the police department and say, this is my gun, this is the serial number, and we should be able to know where that gun is. It does not prohibit people from owning guns, but it does let us know and give us some kind of idea of who owns, as well as if their gun is in the house or if it is being used illegally. There's technology in place for that right now, and if we can track a cell phone, we should be able to track firearms that are being manufactured in our country. It is something that is being done in Europe right now. Guns are being associated with palm prints and rings on fingers before they can be fired. And so as we start talking about guns in our society, we can see from other countries and methods that they are using that is becoming a more serious way to attract these guns. And that's something that we should be considering. I read in the paper the other day that one of your fellow legislators is going to be pushing that same kind of agenda, GPS tracking in guns at the
Very
state
good.
level.
Thank you. I'm going to recognize Representative Turner for some questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Alderman Cochran and Alderman Osterman, for being here today. The background checks piece, I'm glad that you brought it up. It really concerns me. And I was wondering if there was anything that we can do with, I support background checks on all levels, but when there's I'm transferring my gun to a friend or selling my gun to someone else, is there any checks that can be put in place then? Is there any safeguards that can?
I think that there's past legislation that has been supported that had certain people that would be exempt from the law. So if your father, who probably has a shotgun, wanted to sell it to you, that certain family members would be extended. But I think that beyond that, I think it opens it up kind of a very gray area about friendship. But I think a lot of times people go on the internet to buy guns or get them on the secondhand market. The background check system that's in place now takes 2 minutes. And it's an automated system that a federally licensed dealer has to go through. It's done quick. There's a quick turnaround time. There also is put in place in state statute waiting periods of 24 hours and 72 hours for shotguns and handguns that they're not supposed to be relinquished until those waiting periods happen. So I think that a background check system that could be put in place would be able to accommodate those background checks in that time frame, but also prevent people from buying guns that shouldn't have them, and help lead law enforcement to track down those people that are trying to buy those guns illegally. If there's a case, is my understanding, where someone tries to buy a gun illegally, state police refers that to the local law enforcement jurisdiction, which will then pursue a case to find out why someone was trying to buy a gun illegally. And I think that expanding that to all gun sales, I think, would have a very helpful effect and help law enforcement.
Thank you.
Representative Rebelletti, followed by Representative Welch.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and Alderman Osterman, good to see you again.
You too.
I know you and I have had some spirited debates on this issue
I missed
a
those.
few years back, and I as well. You talked about enhanced penalties, and I think that's something I support. One of the things that I think is necessary is that when you have gun crimes, I talked about this in Springfield the other day, when people got probation for unlawful use of a weapon by a felon. There was cases here where a Chicago police officer was murdered by somebody who was on probation after they had violated probation numerous times. And it's unfortunate to say, but maybe if that individual was in prison, that officer would still be here. So I think that's also something I'm working on. I have a bill being drafted that might be a little bit more expansive than the one that Superintendent McCarthy has talked about. And Alderman Cochran, you talked about training and education. And I know that there's been discussions about 4 hours of training at the range and gun safety, and now you're talking about gun education, understand the laws. How many hours overall, how would you see a course? Is it a 40-hour course? We've had some people testify in Springfield that people should actually take police training to get a permit. So I was wondering, with your law enforcement experience, what your thoughts were on what the number of hours should be for qualifications.
Well, there's a certain number of hours that the state mandates for police officers to take in the use of force. That mandate from the state that guides police academies should also be utilized for the requirements of people who should be getting concealed carry weapons. What you have done and put in place is intended to provide the number of hours and the coursework to reinforce when a gun should be used. Fleeing felons, the crimes that are going along with that, all dictate different actions. And so I am all for the same kind of guidelines that is used in police academies to train officers in the use of force should be utilized in these education courses for those who are going to get concealed carry licenses.
And I would also say that I worked on a bill about 4 years ago where we made it mandatory prison for straw purchasers. And I'd like to actually at some point find out from the Cook County State's Attorney's Office how many of those cases they've prosecuted and how many people have been sentenced. Because I've always talked about this with Alderman Osterman on the floor about the fact that Indiana and Mississippi have always been the source of many of the illegal guns that end up here in Chicago. But I think one of the more frustrating things for me was during that bill's debate is that many city legislators either voted present or voted no on that bill. And I think hopefully things have changed with that as we look forward to some other bills coming through with respect to conceal and carry. And I would hope that you would also support mandatory prison for straw purchasers and other things. That's something
I
that
would be
both of
happy
you-
to talk to our Chicago colleagues. I will tell you that I've seen firsthand just the young people that it just seems that there's no consequences to their decisions to pick up a gun. And I think that if you look at other cities, and I'm sure Superintendent McCarthy will talk about New York, where other places have reduced the gun violence, where they've put in some strict penalties, I think we're at a point in time where we have to deal with that. So we're happy to talk to people on that. On the conceal and carry, I do want to mention, though, I think that where people are allowed to carry, conceal and carry is a critical issue. I think I've read recently people advocating carrying them on an L, and I would assume that none of the people that have advocated that have ever ridden on an L. And the closest, so I think that, being, looking at that in a thoughtful way, I think is something that's very, very important.
I appreciate both of your testimony. As we talked with President Preckwinkle, it's going to be very difficult, and you're very well aware of the dynamics of how diverse the state is, but at the same time, we may have to make sure that we follow this Seventh Circuit decision so we don't run afoul of it, and so we end up with constitutional carry. So thank you both.
And I might want to add to that in that the ordinance as we have designed it currently provides for business owners, institutions to allow or not allow people to come in with concealed carry. So those rights are extended and are not taken away. They are constitutional rights just like anything else. And so we support that.
Representative Welch.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Alderman Osterman, thank you for your comment on mass transit, because I did have a question on that, and you answered that. Alderman Cochran, I've spent the last 15 years as a lawyer defending police officers in federal court when they're accused of excessive force, alleged civil rights violations. When it comes to concealed carry, I'm worried about those types of cases escalating. From your perspective as a way to address a person when approached by a law enforcement officer?
Well, procedurally, I think that's something that all law enforcement and all legislators have to look at in terms of how an officer approaches a street stop, a vehicle stop. That would be one of the questions that you would ask. If in fact there was something that dictated that question to be asked. I think as you as a lawyer, as you analyze this, in some things, it may not necessarily be the case for me to, as a law enforcement officer, to make an inquiry about that. But in those situations where officers have to or feel like they should, and if that right should always be with the law enforcement officer as far as I'm concerned, do you have a weapon? Are you licensed to carry that weapon? Securing and ensuring the safety of an officer is a priority. And one of the things that I see coming out of this is, in fact, if I stop a person, they may have a concealed carry. Does that mean that they won't use that gun? What I need to do is get in control of that situation. And that means, do I handcuff that person until it is further determined that they are someone that I can trust to be reasonable with that gun? Is that going to be a civil rights violation? These are all things that you have to consider when we start introducing this concealed carry. And I think another thing as state legislators and aldermen, we have to look at those guidelines that are in place across the country and how they are addressing this same situation. I have to say that I have not made any inquiries to any law enforcement agencies about how they approach this, but it should be, and I'm sure it will be, something in which we have to do an analysis, and law enforcement agencies have to determine how they are going to provide the training and the guidance for officers in this situation.
Thank you, Alderman.
Representative Durkin?
Thank you, Alderman. Good to see you, Harry. I think we all agree that I never will own a gun, but it doesn't mean that people who do own one are necessarily bad or there's something wrong with them. That's their right and that's their prerogative. But when we get into the issue of background checks with the transfer of a gun, it's very important that we look at how things are defined in these laws. And I don't go during deer season. I don't, pack up a gun and go out with the guys. But in certain parts of the state, it's a rite of passage with young men. And it's very important. And I just want to make sure that when we do talk about a transfer and how it's defined, is that when it is with neighbors, friends, and we go on those types of trips, or it's a father transferring and giving his son his gun, that's going to be subject to any of the possible restrictions or background check requirements. And I hope that is, when I say that is not what you intend, or Alderman Cochran, that we should include that type of transaction when we talk about familial, but we do also have neighbors, friends, and particularly in those situations when we have, deer season and when there is that annual trip, which is very important for a number of people that we know from downstate Illinois. So you can comment, but I just want to make sure that we need to be very careful how we define a transfer of a firearm, that we don't go too far where we are going to really be, I think, overly aggressive and probably we get into the unintended consequence.
Well, two points I'd like to make. One is, if you were to ask state police or prosecutors how many times someone has been prosecuted in the state of Illinois for lending, giving a firearm to a friend, I would venture to say it's zero. So I think that unintended consequences, I totally understand, and that's not my intention, and it never has been. I don't think that that's the intention. I think prosecutors, law enforcement are busy going after criminals with firearms. They're not going to waste their time going after someone who lent a gun for a day or is at a rifle range and said, here. I don't think that's a transfer. I think that you would probably, as a good lawyer, look at the definition of transfer, which I think is probably very vague. And I think it's probably very vague for a reason, because people don't want to more strictly define what a transfer is. I think defining more strictly what a transfer is might be a good thing as well. On that front,
vagueness can be a problem, though, and we'll have multiple interpretations throughout the state. So I would encourage that we have perhaps a more definitive in exclusion of certain types, and I'm not sure how we get there. But transferring weapons, I mean, a lot of guys are sitting in the Illinois Department of Corrections for being the accountable person on shootings and also murders. So it depends on what the purpose of the firearm is. But I just say that, I know your position, Harry, very well for years, and I respect it. But let's just be very careful in how we define these things. And I'm going to ask the superintendent, too, those same questions.
Here's the one thing that I think for the suburban colleagues, and I would say ask your constituents. Ask your constituents if they mind going through a background check to sell their firearm. If they go to Ocala's or they go to a gun store in the suburbs or somewhere in the state, they go through a 2-minute background check that's painless. I would think that they would want to have a background check done and know that the rest of the state of Illinois is going through that process. I think that in my experience, hunters, veterans, when you bring up a background check, sure, I go through a background check. Why wouldn't I? I'm not fearful of going through a background check. So I think if you ask your constituents, do they mind going through a background check? And if you can tell them that background checks today stop 1,300 people a year from getting a gun that shouldn't get a gun, I think that they're going to support that. I think they'll support that in southern Illinois and in the suburbs, and I know they support it in the city of Chicago.
Well, if I did have a firearm and I lent a shotgun to a neighbor 2 blocks away who was going up to Wisconsin for some deer hunting, I don't think he's going to have the same response. And if it's So
I think
again,
if that's-
we're getting back
if-
to definitions, but
If that's the critical issue, I think that there are people on this committee in the House and Senate that can further define that to protect that. And it start with just the raw people that don't know each other that are buying a gun. And I think that's the main concern that law enforcement and that all of us share.
thank you.
Thank you. Thank you both, Alderman, for coming here today and for your testimony. So we are going to move on now to the next panel, which includes some representatives from Mass Transit, and that would be Forrest Claypool from the CTA, Jeannie Wren from PACE, and Jordan Matches from RTA. If you'll just identify yourselves for the record and start whenever you're ready. I'll remind everybody that we have a 5-minute limit. I'll give you a 30-second notice when your time's about to expire, and I'm more than happy to cut you off. Mr. Claypool, yeah, thank you.
There we go. Thank you, Chairman Nekritz and members of the committee. Thank you for allowing me to offer testimony today on this critical public safety issue. My name is Forrest Claypool. I'm the president of the Chicago Transit Authority. The CTA is the nation's second largest transit agency, providing 1.7 million rides each day in Chicago and 35 suburbs. Last year, our system provided 545 million rides, the highest level in 22 years. Safety and security on our system has been a high priority since I took the helm slightly less than 2 years ago. In that time, Mayor Emanuel and I have installed thousands of surveillance cameras throughout our system. And we now have more than 3,600 surveillance cameras on the rail system alone, in addition to cameras on every CTA bus. And we are now installing cameras on each of our 1,330 rail cars on the interior. We work closely with the Chicago Police Department in ramping up our efforts to combat crime and provide a more secure and safe environment for our customers. We've added more than 50 additional full-time police officers at CTA expense to the existing Chicago Public Transit unit, as well as the existing resources of commanders in the districts that cover our rail and bus lines. We've worked very closely with the Chicago Police Department in terms of mapping statistics, trends, and helping to deploy CPD resources based on crime patterns and surveillance, including a new state-of-the-art video room at the CTA, in which detectives from the police department have been assigned to work with our former police commanders in that unit. Last year, as a result of these efforts, violent crime declined by 19% on our system. The CTA, along with other regional transit agencies, opposes legislation to allow concealed carry. Most transit systems of our size have significant limitations on who can ride transit with a concealed weapon. Generally only law enforcement. Allowing people to carry concealed weapons in a confined space, like a bus or a train, especially on an elevated track or a subway, would create an unsafe environment for the more than 2 million people who use mass transit in Illinois every day. It would be a recipe for disaster. Similar to exceptions for firearms on carriers such as airplanes, prohibitions should be in place for public transit. Enclosed spaces like trains and buses are not suitable they're not appropriate environments for firearms, as anyone who's experienced rush hour crowding on a rail or bus. Making it easier for people to carry lethal weapons on trains and buses simply creates more opportunities for accidents and disagreements to escalate into violence because of the close proximity of people on trains and buses. Allowing concealed firearms would put our customers and employees in danger because the chances of injury, accidental or otherwise, increases dramatically and could endanger the lives of hundreds of passengers on a platform or dozens of customers on a crowded train or bus. That's not a risk we should take. What's more, allowing concealed carry would unnecessarily create fear among our passengers. Commuters on their daily rides would be faced with the concern that the person standing next to them inches away could be carrying a firearm. I join all of our mass transit peers in Illinois in urging you to provide an exception on concealed carry for mass transit facilities and protect the safety of the public and our passengers. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Mr. Matches.
Good morning. My name is Jordan Matches. I'm the Chief of Staff for the Regional Transportation Authority. The RTA is the oversight body of CTM and PACE, and combined we have over 2 million riders per day. Our primary responsibility is financial oversight and planning, and this is of great concern to us. We have great concerns about the financial impact of this bill, whether it would result in reduced ridership, also just the additional costs of what would need to be implemented in order to make sure that we were providing the safest transit environment. Additionally, we have concerns about a whole variety of things, including insurance rates. Just how are we going to get insurance coverage for this? What is going to happen with accidents? As President Claypool alluded to, one of our biggest concerns is this enclosed environment. During the rush hour period, you're crammed next to each other. While there might be somebody that is properly trained on having a gun, it would be very easy for someone else to get access to it. This is very similar to an airplane. We don't allow guns on airplanes. Why? It's an enclosed space. You can't get out. You can't escape. That's similar to an elevated train. You're however many feet in the air, or you're in a tunnel. This is not the ideal place for people to have guns. And again, we're afraid it will cause massive fear among our riders. Finally, we'd also just like to express our concern about our office space. There's been some discussion about whether or not concealed carry would be allowed in government buildings or where public hearings are held. As an example, the RTA space is held in a private building, and we are not equipped to handle that kind of security. So we would ask not only for an exemption for mass transit, but also for mass transit buildings, garages, and any place where public hearings are held. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Madam Chairman and members of the House Judiciary Committee, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you this morning. My name is Jeannie Wren, and I would like to offer testimony on behalf of PACE, the Suburban Bus Division of the RTA. PACE is the premier suburban transit provider, quickly moving people to work and school safely and efficiently. PACE is the backbone of Chicago's suburbs, serving tens of thousands of daily riders with fixed bus routes, van pools, and a dial-a-ride program. PACE covers 3,500 square miles, is one of the largest bus services in North America. 18% of our ridership is comprised of students and senior citizens. In 2012, there were 32 million rides taken on paced fixed bus routes. 6.4 million rides were provided to students and seniors, with an additional 4.8 million rides provided via our paratransit and dial-a-ride programs. Our PACE Advantage program is a service that targets serving people with disabilities, and we gave another 900,000 rides last year for that population. PACE also provides special express shuttle services for special events throughout the Chicagoland area, such as Bears, Cubs, Sox games, and concerts. Some of our routes drive directly through campus settings throughout the 6-county area that we cover. The issue of ensuring the safety of PACE ridership and our employees is our top priority. There are many logistical matters to take into account when discussing mass transportation, especially when you are considering dealing with a moving vehicle, carrying passengers, most of whom are strangers, riding in a confined space in an environment where interpersonal conflicts are commonplace. Allowing for passengers to carry concealed weapons on our buses is simply not good public policy. Our diverse ridership, the myriad of risk factors involved, the countless potential scenarios involving passengers with one another and our employees, and the increased liability provide just a brief sampling of the reasons why this proposition is just not sound or reasonable. Increased risks could lead to decreased ridership, which is something we simply cannot afford. We respectfully request that mass transit be included as part of the exemption or any restriction in any of the enumerated legislation that's being drafted. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Madam Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Laura Calderon, and I am the Executive Director for the Illinois Public Transportation Association. We represent the regulatory and legislative needs of transit agencies statewide. Our members include 50 transit operators across Illinois, providing service in 95 of the 102 counties. Our members range in size from large urban systems, much like the ones here in the Chicagoland region, down to small, rural, one-county systems in downstate Illinois. Our organization and its members have been monitoring closely the conversations you all have been having about the concealed carry issue. IPTA's Board of Directors discussed this issue at our most recent board meeting last month, and our board voted unanimously to support amendments that would prohibit citizens from boarding transit or coming into transit facilities carrying loaded firearms. Public transportation agencies such as RIDE's Mass Transit District, which represents 16 counties in the most rural part of Illinois, southern Illinois, other mass transit districts in St. Clair County, Springfield, Champaign-Urbana, Rockford, just to name a few, are all unified in urging the General Assembly to consider such amendments. I've spoken at length with many of our members about this issue, some who have even said, "I am a gun owner." I wholeheartedly respect an individual's right to bear arms, but there is just no question that a gun fired within a confined space and could easily result in unintended tragic loss of life. And across the board, the message from all of our members has been the same. We have a responsibility to provide a safe environment for our passengers and employees. And undoubtedly, an individual's ability to carry a concealed weapon aboard public transit compromises that safe environment. Passengers' perception of safety is absolutely critical, especially for our most vulnerable citizens. The members of the Illinois Public Transportation Association urge you to make an exception for public transit, much like the exception that prohibits passengers from carrying firearms through airports or aboard airplanes. We ask that as this issue is deliberated, our industry is included in those deliberations. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to you here today.
Thank you. Are there questions from members? Representative Drury and then Representative Rebeletti.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the four of you for your testimony. There's been a couple comparisons made to airports, and people can't carry firearms on planes. The issue or the question I'll throw out there, obviously when we go through an airport, if I had a firearm before I got to the metal detector, I certainly would go through the metal detector, and then hopefully they would find my firearm and I wouldn't be allowed on the plane. For the CTA or PACE or any of the transit systems that you run, there's not metal detectors at every entrance. So if we pass a law that says CTA, RTA, PACE, Metra can't have firearms, have you looked at what the cost would be to implement technology that actually would catch people with firearms, and whether or not that could be a fee that could be imposed on the FOID card application or when someone gets a firearm, so that they're subsidizing that system so that we actually know that people aren't carrying firearms on our public transit?
Well, I would say that the main deterrent of being it illegal, obviously, to carry a gun on transit is that it would be a felony, I presume, and a person could be arrested and jailed for being caught with a gun on our system, as opposed to setting up a series of airport-like detection systems. I don't envision that. Although New York City does do targeted entry checks and stops as a part of a Homeland Security operation that they did after 9/11. So there are police procedures that can provide additional deterrence through constitutional checks, but I think the main deterrent is the criminal penalties associated with violating the act.
Thank you.
Representative Rebeletti.
I guess my question is, since the Second Amendment allows us to protect ourselves, and we see some of the robberies that have happened, even resulting in death, where we've seen a disabled person pushed down the steps of an L platform being robbed of a cell phone, I guess my concern is, do we want to be able to take away arms from people to protect themselves while they're traveling throughout the city or traveling throughout the state? And so that's one of the issues. I think that goes back to the core of the Second Amendment. So maybe you can talk a little bit about that.
The case you talked about was an individual who grabbed a smartphone and was fleeing the system and ran into a woman who was at the top of a stairwell and fell to her death. So I don't think a gun in that situation, someone carrying a gun would have prevented that. However, you know, as we indicated, overall, the difference is you have a system, particularly in a crowded space, it's at stations, buses, trains, particularly at rush hour, where any bullet that was discharged, either accidentally or by someone who thought that they were doing the right thing by targeting a criminal, would in all likelihood also injure or kill other innocent bystanders. It's very hard to, in that environment, to discharge a firearm effectively and hit your target only, no mistakes, and no one else be affected by that. So that is the difference in the systems. And yes, there are crimes on the system, but your chances of being victimized by crime are very low. We had 6,000 criminal acts. Last year, the CTA provided 554 million rides, 554 million, and there were 6,000 crimes on the system, and many of those were crimes that don't affect passengers directly, such as turnstile jumping or graffiti, things like that. So that means that's 1/1000%, even including the graffiti, turnstile jumping as well. So that's why we've made this huge investment in the security camera and surveillance system. It's why we put more work with the Chicago Police Department to put more police officers on the system. It's why we have undercover officers. It's why we have video surveillance. Those efforts have made a difference. As I indicated, violent crime is down almost 20% since those cameras and extra police coordination with our operations have been put in place under Mayor Emanuel. So we're making significant progress there. Obviously, smartphone thefts, things like that, those are up everywhere because of the ubiquitousness of smartphones, the ease with which they can be snatched. But a gun in those situations is, I don't think having someone use a gun to try to prevent those types of crimes is unfortunately, I think the odds it would tell you that someone else is going to be injured. And it's simply not the environment. Concealed carry in other environments may work very well. On a crowded train or bus or platform in a station, it's a recipe for disaster.
And I appreciate that, and I know that you've taken many steps to try to lower the crime rate. My concern is that the gang members always will carry. They don't care what the laws are. And I appreciate what you're trying to do. I know that you have limited resources to put more police officers on the street and on the elevated tracks and buses and whatnot. How many gun crimes have occurred on the CTA where you have UUWs and any shootings?
There were 3 shootings on the system last year, and no one was killed.
What about arrests of people who had firearms while on public transit? Yeah,
I think and my understanding is the Chicago Police Department will be offering testimony this afternoon, and they are the keepers of the official statistics, and I would rather defer to them on actually what those statistics are. I can tell you that we've arrested with these new cameras, for example, 144 individuals last year with assistance of the police, taking them off the system. So the impact that these additional deterrence strategies are having. What percentage of those 6,000 crimes were gun-related? I do know it's very, very small, but I would let the police this afternoon give you the exact number.
Thank you very much.
Representative Sims.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Claypool, I'm interested to examine a little bit of the fiscal impact on the system. You mentioned there was be an impact on ridership if concealed carry was implemented, and particularly for mass transit. So I'm interested to know if the system or any of the systems have done an analysis on the fiscal impact on the systems, on how ridership will be impacted.
That's a good question. I'm not aware of any. I think it would be speculative at this point, but there may be others on the panel that have the view.
And also, we received communication from the ATU today about if concealed carry were allowed, they would be asking for additional resources for training for them and for an additional salary increases to allow them to serve in dual capacities. Do you have a response to that, and what the impact on that might be for the system financially?
You know, I don't. I'm not really quite sure what he's referring to.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Anyone else? All right. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate your testimony.
Thank you, Madam Chairman.
So next, I think we'll call up Dr. Paula, and I apologize if I mispronounce your name, Bradich? Just want to identify yourself and the organization you're representing. And make sure the green light is on the microphone.
Good morning. My name is Dr. Paula Bradich. I'm a veterinarian by trade. I was born and raised in South Chicago. I currently live in Calumet City, part of Cook County. I'm the Illinois coordinator for the Second Amendment Sisters, but more importantly, I'm a female gun owner. There's around 250,000 FOID owners in Cook County. Around, they guess 25% of them are women, so I'm one of 60,000. Evil exists. Most violent attacks occur against women, the handicapped, and seniors. Most of it occurs in driveways and parking lots. I recently attended a lunch discussion at the Union League of Chicago about gun violence. No one discussed giving more gun control except to say it was a reaction to do something when a tragedy occurs. They discussed actual causes, such as a lack of good schools, a lack of community involvement, a lack of jobs, a lack of small businesses, especially in the black communities, drug cartels, the profit of drugs. Chicago is considered a 20-year handgun ban experiment that has failed. And since when do we leave the U.S. constitutional to local control? What if we did that with civil rights or the woman's rights to vote? Most people don't realize that when Otis McDonald won the lawsuit against Chicago, it was about the Second Amendment being incorporated under the 14th Amendment, protecting our rights from infringement upon local government. Guns are a simple tool, and just like cars, women can be trained to defend themselves. We have 3 checks in Illinois. The first one is Form 4473, which makes us eligible under the federal law. Then the FOID card, which only Illinois has, and now the concealed carry permit. So in Illinois, this 3rd check must be a shall issue permit. If you turn it into a may issue, expect to get a multitude of lawsuits, especially if our Superintendent McCarthy decides who gives the permit. Sad to say, Superintendent McCarthy has been heard in a recent Sunday talk show that firearm owners who lobby or donate for the Second Amendment are guilty of corruption and endangering public safety. Lawsuit for discrimination by bias, here we come. I don't need to remind this group how broke Illinois is. Let's talk just for a moment about this slippery slope of loosening concealed carry laws that gun control groups talk about. Ladies and gentlemen, do you think the representatives of those states in positions that you are in today would have continued to loosen their laws regarding concealed carry if there were any statistics at all indicating crime had worsened after they had introduced it into their states? Really? There are many gun stories. I quickly want to comment about an incident involving a 37-year-old mom in Georgia. This mom, hiding in a closet with her 2 kids, on the phone with 911, shot an intruder when he opened the closet door after forcing his way through 3 other doors. Okay, there is a surge of women gun owners due to the disparity of force recognized by all states. Owning a tool such a gun is very empowering for a woman. This bill must include the whole state. Are you going to tell me that this committee would deny the single black mom in Englewood the same rights as the rest of the women in this state? As my friend Otis has said, this is not a black or white issue. This is not a Democratic or Republican issue. This is a life or death issue. We have here HB 997, something many people have worked very, very, very hard, worked with many groups, law enforcement groups, schools. There is a saying, crime happens in seconds, police are minutes away. This is true whether you're at home, in a restaurant, or on a train, like in the other 49 other states. Should we let the criminals know that any women they see on the L platform are disarmed? This would benefit all of you, your moms, your wives, your daughters, your sisters. A woman must decide what she feels comfortable doing if a violent or evil person enters her world. If they pass all the checks, they pay their fees, they do their training, they have the right to choose what tool to defend themselves so they can go home to their families and their loved ones. Thank you.
I'd ask the audience not to applaud. There's no demonstrations, and we will remove you if there's any further demonstrations. Are there questions from members?
Sure.
Seeing none, thank you very much for your testimony. All right, I believe we're going to move on then to Superintendent McCarthy. Mr. McCarthy, he's here. Ma'am, no one's recognized you, and we have a list of us that we're not going to take testimony from the public unless you're on the list. So I'm going to ask you to step back from the witness table, and otherwise I'll have to. Okay, thank you. Is Chief McCarthy here? Okay. No. If you have written comments, we can get them to the clerk and they'll be distributed to the members. Okay, well then it'll be distributed to the members. We'll get it.
Madam Chairman, I have a witness slip confirmation, but I did not make it onto your schedule.
Well, you may have. I'm going to have to. We have to deal with staff. I'm not going to deal with that from the chair. Welcome. I'm here.
Good morning.
I think you've been advised that we have a 5-minute time limit. I'll give you a 30-second warning, and then we'll take questions from members. So if you'll identify yourself for the record, and please proceed whenever you're ready.
Sure. I'm Gary McCarthy. I'm the police superintendent for the city of Chicago. Thank you, Leader Nekritz, for the opportunity to be here with you today. Every day, members of the Chicago Police Department see firsthand the devastation caused by firearms. And every day, police officers are confronted by offenders who are increasingly brazen and fearless in their actions. In fact, our officers put themselves in harm's way to protect the public and take firearms off the street. Our department recovers more guns than any municipality in the United States of America, year in and year out. More than 7,400 guns in 2012, which in the first 6 months of that year, where the data is available, was 9 guns for every one that New York City recovered, and 3 guns for every one that was recovered in Los Angeles. And our communities have felt the pain and suffering of the violence as a result of the proliferation of those firearms on our streets. Each week, we take an average of 139 guns off the streets. This tells us a couple of things. First, we need to stem the flow of illegal firearms into our city. And second, we need to hold violent criminals fully accountable for their actions. Nothing could be more obvious. Despite our recoveries and increased public awareness around the issue of firearm safety, in the wake of the senseless tragedies that have occurred in places like Connecticut, Virginia Tech, and every day in our urban centers across this country, in cities like Chicago, we continue to outpace other cities in the seizure of firearms. I understand that, due to the recent Seventh Circuit decision, we are now required to pass concealed carry legislation. But the solutions to gun violence in our city really lie in a number of issues. The first one is strategic and intelligent policing. The second one is stiffer penalties for criminals who violate the law. The third one are smart prevention programs for our youth. And the fourth one is sensible parenting for families. And these are the points that Mayor Rahm Emanuel has outlined. But I want to be clear that there is no compelling evidence, despite what gun advocates say, to show that more guns makes people safer. In fact, the first victim of the Sandy Hook massacre was the legal firearm possessor, Mrs. Lanza. In fact, more guns, even legal guns, in the hands of people on the street could end up changing hands during robberies and killing people who possess those firearms, or can be taken during burglaries and end up becoming illegal guns on the streets of our cities. With more handguns on our streets, our officers will face even more challenges, and having concealed weapons on our streets will certainly make our job more difficult and more dangerous. My 3 decades in law enforcement has convinced me that only the most responsible and highly trained people should have the right to carry a concealed firearm, and that right must be decided in a thoughtful and considerate manner. We cannot allow weapons permits to be handed out at will, and we must make sure that people with a criminal history or a terrorist background, alcohol, drug addictions, and those who have mental illness do not have access to firearms under this new law. To accomplish this, we must upgrade and enhance the information and infrastructure that we at CPD, and indeed every law enforcement agency in the state, uses. A robust system with current and reliable information is the only way to ensure that people who have the right will have the ability to carry and have access to firearms. Additionally, we need stronger laws surrounding the reporting of a lost, stolen, or transferred firearm as a way to prevent straw purchases. Those firearms are legally purchased
Chief McCarthy, you get 30
and
seconds left.
illegally transferred. As you know, a gun does not come off an assembly line illegal. When a gun ends up at a crime scene, more often than not, traffickers are involved. So when we recover a weapon, especially one used in a crime, tracing that weapon is a critical component of our investigation. The tracing can tell us where the gun came from, how they got to the streets of Chicago, and who else may be involved. In fact, these laws...
I'm going to have to ask you to bring your remarks to a close so I can stick to the 5-minute time limits.
Okay. In fact, these laws that we are suggesting will make criminals unavailable to commit crimes, as happened recently in the unfortunate murder of Hydea Pendleton. Significant mandatory minimums would have prevented the alleged shooter in that incident from being available to commit that crime.
Great. Thank you. Are there questions from members? I'll start with Representative Welch, and we'll move down to this end.
Mr. Superintendent, thank you for joining us this morning. I just have 2 questions. I don't know if I missed it. Do you have an official position on mass transit and firearms?
My position is that in confined spaces, firearms present a greater danger, especially confined spaces probably packed with people presents a greater danger. The thing that the incident that comes to mind frequently is Bernhard Goetz in New York City in I guess it was the 80s. I don't think areas where there are lots of people, like stadiums, sports events, concerts, I believe that people packed into an area creates a greater danger if there are firearms present.
And my second question is I asked Alderman Cochran earlier, who's a retired police officer, in regards to police officers dealing with those who are lawfully carrying a gun under a concealed carry law. I'm concerned about excessive force cases against police officers and these possibly increasing. What is a reasonable way to address that in a law on concealed carry? What should be the responsibility of the person who's carrying a weapon on them? Is there a responsibility of the police officer?
Well, the responsibility, I think back on how we handle police-related confrontations, because officers who are carrying weapons off-duty end up in those situations frequently. And the way that the protocol works, and what I would recommend, perhaps even putting it into law, would be that the responsibility and the onus of identification is on the person who is being confronted by the on-duty or uniformed police officer. Because many times we're trained first to take control of a situation. Once we take control of that situation and the danger mitigated, then we can bring it down and start discussing who's who and what's what. There's going to be confusion when we confront people who are carrying firearms legally. because we don't know if they're legal or illegal until we conduct an investigation. But in that first confrontation, there's a very dangerous confrontation that's taking place between two armed people. So what happens in that first millisecond is really critical to how that endeavor is going to go, and therefore the onus is on the person who's being confronted by the police officer. Conversely, I need to raise the issue that what may in fact happen is we are going to have lesser trained civilians who have a right to bear firearms who are going to be confronting trained police officers off duty, which is going to create another danger. That protocol becomes really hard to differentiate how we're going to handle it, because that off-duty officer, there's a burden and an onus on that officer to take proper police action when confronted with a crime-type situation that they're not going to realize that they're in initially.
Thank you, Superintendent.
Thank you, Representative Drury, followed by Representative Zaleski.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Superintendent, thank you for coming this morning, and thank you for your service.
Thank you.
Just a follow-up on your previous answer, and then a couple questions. So if the onus is on, let's say it's a traffic stop, and the onus is on the driver who has a concealed carry permit to identify, officer, I have a concealed carry permit, I have a gun. Do you know how other states, if the person fails to do that, and then subsequently a gun is found during the stop because the person has to leave the car or anything, is that a crime in other states? Do you know how they're treating that situation where someone doesn't do their duty as a citizen and a responsible citizen to tell an officer that they have the gun
I'm not
with them?
positive that that's written into law. I believe it's basically protocols on a department-by-department basis. So I really don't have that information. That's a great question. I'd love to know the answer to it, honestly.
Okay, yeah, I think that would be something that we would need to work through as a legislator to know, because I worked at the U.S. Attorney's Office. I worked with some of your officers, and I know how scary a situation can be walking up to a car, not knowing what's inside that car, and it'd be even scarier when there's more people carrying guns out there. So I appreciate that. There's been a lot of talk about this lost or stolen issue, and there's a lot of talk about straw purchasers. If I could ask you, there may be some people who don't know what a straw purchaser is. We talk about it all the time in all these hearings, but I don't think anyone's really defined it. Can you just give us a couple sentences of what a straw purchase is and why it's a problem?
Sure. A straw purchase is the primary method by which illegal firearms reach the streets of the city of Chicago. A straw purchase is when an otherwise legal person who has a right, in the state of Illinois, they would possess an FOID card, have a driver's license, have a residence in the state of Illinois, can walk into a gun store, purchase guns legally, and walk out the door and give that gun to a criminal, which happens frequently. The number one source for firearms recovery in the city of Chicago for time immemorial is Cook County, which is really important to realize, because it's not like other places where I've worked, where there's an iron pipeline that comes up from the south. There is some of that. A lot of our guns come from Indiana, but our number one source of firearms recoveries, of illegal guns now, comes from Cook County. In fact, one gun shop in Cook County, we've recovered 3,500 guns over a 10-year period, which basically represents almost one gun a day for 10 years from one gun shop. The primary method by which those guns reach our streets illegally is the legal purchase by the straw purchaser, and then the illegal transfer to the criminal's hands.
And then following up on that, my experience working on gun cases, I didn't work on any gun case personally where the gun that was found was in the name of the person we found it on. It either had the serial number etched off of it, or we lost track of it, through the ATF databases, sometimes in the 60s, sometimes more recently. Do you have a similar experience in Chicago that when you're finding guns, UUWs, that more often than not those guns aren't registered to the person who the gun is on?
I can't think of a single case where the gun was registered to the person who we took it from.
So that would be...
Almost without exception. It's going to be exactly as you described.
And so that is one of the reasons, a critical reason why it would be important to be able to track these lost or stolen guns and for someone to report it so we can have more accurate data of what is happening.
That's correct, but I also want to be clear in that when I advocate for loss, theft, or transfer to be required to be reported, my concern is with slowing down the straw purchases, because I want them to be accountable. This is accountability, because, and I could give you examples. The gun that shot Del Pearson here in the city of Chicago almost a year ago, last March 19th, there was one recorded transaction on that firearm. It was purchased by a 53-year-old woman in 1973 in Blue Island, Illinois. One recorded transaction. She died in 2006 in Little Rock, Arkansas. So we have no knowledge as to whether or not that was a straw purchase, that gun was lost, or it was stolen. We just don't have any record. But for sure, that gun has been on the street probably since 2006 when she died. So maybe all the way back to 1973. The requirement to report the loss, theft, or transfer is not to create a registry. It's not to create any sort of record other than, in my opinion, the most important thing is to slow down that straw purchasing by holding them accountable. Of course, those cases are very difficult to make. You almost need a confession to make a straw purchase prosecution, which makes it very, very difficult to do. When we recover the gun, we come back and we say, we recovered your gun. And many times they say, well, thank you. That gun was lost 2 years ago, but I didn't have to report it, so I didn't.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Representative Zaleski?
So, Superintendent, thank you for your testimony and thanks for being here. What we're told about the problem with lost and stolen is that if we were to require that upon law-abiding gun owners, that, like you said, either would be created as a quasi-registration system, or the police would use that to sort of coalesce around those who are law-abiding gun owners. Is it your testimony that that wouldn't happen? In other words, you would treat lost weapons as a theft crime, and you would process it as you would any other crime in the city of Chicago?
That is exactly correct, and I'd like to be clear that it would be very easy to determine who is the legal possessor versus who is the straw purchaser. Because John Q. Citizen, who rightfully exercises their Second Amendment right to possess firearms, is going to be a possessor probably of a number of firearms, and not every one of those is going to be lost. Whereas the straw purchaser is going to have 10 purchases and lost 11 guns. So it's going to be very easy to determine, and the law should include some sort of an affirmative defense that's going to protect citizens who are rightfully exercising their right to possess firearms.
So in other words, if you're a law-abiding citizen and these guns, the weapons are reasonably expensive. I mean, they're property that one wishes to take care of. It's your experience in law enforcement that if you lose one or one is stolen, you'll go to the police, file a report, and wish for the police to investigate that particular loss or theft.
The law-abiding citizen generally does that because they're concerned about the safety issue besides the fact that they want their firearm back.
And just on one other question on enhancements, is it your experience in arrests for UUW and subsequent prosecutions, what do you see happening in the court system when a person is arrested under current law for ag UUW? What's occurring that leads you to believe that our particular statute isn't strong enough?
Without the mandatory minimum, what's happening is, I guess it's called conditional sentencing.
Conditional discharge.
Conditional discharge is being applied, and many of these individuals are receiving probation. And as I alluded to very clearly in the case of Hydea Pendleton, the alleged shooter, right, he has his rights, would not have been available if there was a mandatory minimum applied to gun possession in the fashion that we're talking about. And what I'm doing every week is doing press and showing individual incidents. We've now shown in the last 2 weeks 12 separate incidents of individuals who were either victims of gunfire, murdered by gunfire, or murderers who would not have been available to commit those crimes if there were mandatory minimums for UUW and truth in sentencing, because they would have been incarcerated. And many times now, these folks are dead, they're victims or perpetrators, offenders of shootings, because it's a small cadre of people who are committing the vast amount of violent crime on our streets. And this incarceration issue would actually prevent the internment, is what I like to say.
We passed a law a couple years ago that said if you are convicted of ag UUW and you don't have a valid FOID card, it's non-probationable. Is it your experience in arrests for ag UUW that most offenders do not possess a valid FOID card? Most, if not all.
I have not seen any legal gun offender who possesses a FOID card. It just doesn't happen. The gang members are criminals. They're not eligible to receive those cards. And what's happening is the facilitation of that firearm getting into their hands comes through the legal purchase by a straw purchaser and the illegal transfer. Those are not legal guns. And that is not, I have no concern with legal guns. I have a great concern with illegal guns, which happens during the transfer.
Thank you, Superintendent. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Williams.
Thank you, Superintendent. Back to the issue of concealed carry, looking at crafting the best law that will keep the citizens safe in densely populated areas such as Chicago. We've talked a lot about training. In your experience, what would a training requirement look like to ensure that guns were being carried safely under a concealed carry statute?
Well, what I can tell you is that we, as police officers, have to undergo 80 hours of firearms training. And, 6 months of police academy training, regular ongoing training, plus field training after we graduate the police academy. And we make mistakes constantly. I don't know what the right number is, but I'm very, very concerned about people not being adequately trained with possession of a firearm. We make mistakes all the time in spite of our training. We don't have, sometimes the wrong people get hit when we do fire our firearms. And these are the dangers that I'm concerned with. I'm not sure what the right number is, but my greatest concern is the fact that it's not going to be adequate. And I can't really give you a number right now. I do some research about what we do across the country and what are the best practices to really intelligently answer your question. My concern is giving somebody a 10-hour training course and say, here, have at it. I see that as a problem.
Thank you. And along those lines, we talked a bit about mass transit and other crowded situations. Looking to a concealed carry bill, where would you suggest are other areas where you would absolutely not want a gun to be carried? And something, of course, comes to mind. In my neighborhood, there are a lot of summer events, street festivals, street fairs, concerts, etc. What's your opinion on other venues where you think it's inappropriate to carry a concealed loaded gun?
Any place where alcohol is served, because many times people get into confrontations, which is fueled by alcohol, and as a result, they end up striking each other with glasses or bottles in a bar. Think about if there was a firearm involved. I also, on the back end of that, there's a second concern that I really need to bring to your attention, which, let's say for argument's sake, people who go to the beach, right? Obviously, you're not going to carry a firearm while you're wearing your swim trunks on a beach, hopefully. And what they may do is secrete those firearms in vehicles, right? Now, what happens when that car gets stolen or the trunk gets broken into? My concern is not only where we should carry, but how we should secure the firearms when we're not carrying them. But definitely bars, taverns, clubs, any place, like I mentioned, sports venues where there's large crowds of people, mass transit locations, I believe are potential for disaster. But there's street scenes across the city, like you point out, street fairs where people are going to crowd in. Any place in that, any venue in that regard, I believe would create a greater danger to the public.
Great. Thank you.
I have to apologize. I just realized I need to add Leader Bradley to the roll, so he is on the roll now, and Representative Rebeletti for some questions.
Thank you, Superintendent, for being here today, and I can appreciate your concerns for illegal guns on the streets. I was in the organized crime unit in Will County for 8 years before being here and prosecuted numerous guns and gang cases and narcotics cases. And I've sat on the House floor, and I'm not sure, I'll ask you if you agree with me, that Chicago's main issue is that it has a gang problem that is fueled by the narcotics trade, and that many of the gun cases are usually with some type of either direct or indirect connection to turf wars and fighting over street corners. And is that something that you would agree with? I know it's more generic, but that's how I perceive it, at least.
Correct, and they fight over everything. They may fight over a girl. They might fight over the fact that their children had an argument in school. So what makes that, I mean, it's a generic question that you asked me, but I'd like to address the fact that what I perceive as the biggest issue in Chicago is the methods by which those guns reach our streets, which I believe, and evidence shows, that it's through straw purchasing, where those legal guns get illegally transferred, which leaves us every single year seizing more firearms than any place else in the country. I believe that's facilitated without the requirement for loss, theft, or transfer to be reported. And then on the back end of the criminal justice system, where folks who are arrested for illegal gun possession are not prosecuted adequately, which puts them, and as I alluded to, and I'm not positive what the number is, but that small minority of the community that causes the vast majority of the crime, they're the offender today, the victim tomorrow, and the offender the day afterwards. And all of this comes clear with some of the examples that we talk about frequently. The Hydea Pendleton case actually showed that also, because that shooting was perceived retaliation for a previous shooting where one of those individuals did not cooperate and wanted to take care of it himself.
And I can agree with you on that, and at least with respect to stiffer penalties. We've seen, I've talked about it numerous times, about people on probation who violate probation. They get resentenced to more probation, and eventually they're out killing Hydea Pendleton, your police officers. One thing I've shared my concern about is lost and stolen. Mm-hmm. And I've debated this issue with Representative Zaleski and others, that just because you go to serve a search warrant at somebody's house and they say, well, my gun's not here, and they go, oh, I didn't know it was stolen, I didn't know it was lost, and that, to me, that's where kind of like the investigation ends. Do you see it differently? Because I have trouble thinking that a Class A misdemeanor, or whatever the class would be, is going to intimidate a gang member into saying, yeah, the gun was stolen, or I lost the gun, or whatever.
Well, the gang member is not likely to be able to purchase that firearm legally. Generally, the straw purchaser is somebody who is pretty legitimate in that they don't have a criminal history, they are a resident, and they might be a college kid. Many times these are college kids. Certainly the situations where folks go out of state and purchase firearms. Generally that happens with young college kids who get a driver's license from that state, purchase the firearms, make a couple of $100s without really thinking through the fact that they might be putting people in jeopardy by doing so. So in my opinion, the law can be constructed and an affirmative defense can be created for legal firearms owners who, as you rightfully point out, a situation where we may serve a search warrant and all of a sudden say, oh, I'm missing a gun, I didn't even know. There's a situation that, quite frankly, I believe needs to be addressed. And I'm not saying that this is a sweeping response or the ultimate answer to what's plaguing us. It's certainly a tool that is going to help address the legitimate person who's buying those firearms and illegally transferring them.
And with respect to the murder rate in the city of Chicago, is that also fueled by the gang wars? Are the majority of the victims, and I know many of the victims are innocent folks as well, blended in with other gang members, is that also driven by the gang wars over narcotics, or what are your statistics showing?
Well, it's difficult sometimes to parse out the motivation. We may have two gang members who get into an argument over a parking spot and end up getting into a shooting, and I'm making something up here, obviously. So it's difficult to be 1,000% accurate on this, but what we find is that in the vicinity of 80% of our shooters are defined gang members. Now, what is the motivation for that shooting is where it becomes a little bit dicey. Is it over a girl? Is it over a parking spot? Or is it in furthering their gang initiation or their gang endeavors?
And I appreciate that. And you talked about 4 different things that you need to address, or that we all need to address to deal with this. And one is policing. And what can the state of Illinois do to help? Is that, I know we already have a shortage of state troopers, but is that something that we should be looking at to have more state troopers to help Chicago Police as well as Cook County Sheriff to deal with the gang issues? That's something that as you see it as far as policing, or is it different strategies that you're trying to implement here that would help reduce that murder rate and the crime rate?
The answer is actually both. And in speaking about our relationship with the state police, obviously it's a great one. But there are some infrastructure issues that we're trying to address. For instance, with the state police doing our ballistics matches, for instance, takes a ballistics match, sometimes up to 6 or 8 months. And that's not a fault, but it's a problem because of the way the system is designed. Is that we really need it right now if it's on the priority list, and we get it turned around much quicker. That's why we're creating our own ballistics lab as we speak here in the city of Chicago. So some of the other issues are things that do require maybe better technology. Certainly more people would definitely help as far as state police are concerned. But at the same time, you know, the strategies that we're implementing in the Chicago Police Department, I'm sure you know my background, that I spent 25 years in the NYPD. My last 7 years was as New York City's principal crime strategist in the NYPD. We're doing virtually everything and more that the NYPD is doing to reduce gun violence. The difference is, in the entirety of the criminal justice system, I believe, and it's very readily apparent to me, that the guns on the front end being facilitated hitting our streets and a lack of certainty of punishment on the back end is in fact fueling our violence and how it repeats itself.
And I agree with you with the stiffer penalties, and we do have mandatory prison for straw purchasers in Illinois, so that's one issue. But you also talked about prevention, and I agree with you on the stiffer penalties as well as the parenting issue. But from the prevention issue, what do you mean by prevention? Because I see things like ceasefire, and we spend a lot of money from state Senate to ceasefire, and I'm not sure if the results are where they should be, and if that money should be reallocated somewhere else back to the state police to help you out, or to grants to the city of Chicago for additional police officers. What else are you talking about with respect to prevention?
Prevention, you know, again, I hearken back to my own experience growing up in the Bronx, New York, in the 60s, when the major problems that we faced were, believe it or not, gangs, guns, and drugs, right? And things haven't changed that much, even a couple of 100 miles away. You know, when I look back, and I had a very poignant experience when I was a young sergeant working in the South Bronx, when one of my grade school friends was brought in front of me in a set of handcuffs. And I couldn't help but think, what was the difference between me sitting behind the desk as a police officer, a sergeant at the time, and him standing in front of that desk in handcuffs? And probably the major thing that I could point to is, besides our family and besides religion, I went to a different high school. I played football, ran track, played baseball, and I was busy. And certainly that the story of idle hands is the devil's workshop played out certainly in my case, and didn't play out in some of my friends' cases when I went back and took a look at who had fallen victim to the streets. The fact is, programs like the mayor's now unveiling a program to get kids off the street playing basketball in the evening, where they're not going to be, they're going to be in safe havens rather than being out there where they can be subject to gang recruitment. Getting those kids busy is definitely something. And I just want to make clear that I am not in any way, shape, or form not taking responsibility as the lead department in reducing gun violence. The fact is, these prevention programs, these legislative steps will support that effort.
And I appreciate that, and hopefully, Superintendent, I'm going to be co-chairing an anti-gangs task force that we'll probably begin to meet sometime after this is concluded, and I hope that at some point you'll be able to come and testify before that group. So thank you for being
I
here today.
absolutely would. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Turner, and I'm going to put Representative Williams in the chair.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Superintendent, for your testimony and being here today. I had a question, my concern, I should say, is more around the mandatory minimum sentencing and the penalty enhancements. And while I don't want to appear soft on crime, and I don't think any of my colleagues do either, the mandatory minimum sentencing on many of the federal levels and others as it relates to the war on drugs and things like that have led to a disproportionate amount of minorities being locked up for a very long time. And so I get a little uneasy when I hear about it as it relates to guns, because I'm wondering how will it be done different, or how will we receive different results. We still have a drug problem that's fueled much of the violence here in Chicago and in other states and in other cities. And I'm wondering what do you think about that?
I'm really glad that you brought that up, Representative, because this is something that's very, very important and needs to have a public discussion and a recognition of that exact issue, the disproportionate effect on the African-American community with drug laws. The fact is, not every drug user or every drug seller is a trigger puller. And I really want to draw that distinction, so that while illegal narcotics may fuel the gangs to have money to purchase weapons, the fact is not every drug seller is a trigger puller. The likelihood is a gun carrier, an illegal gun carrier, is likely to be a trigger puller, because otherwise they wouldn't be carrying the firearm. So I need to draw that distinction. What I also need to draw attention to is the disproportionate impact of gun violence on the African American community that's going along with that problem. And the fact is, the number one cause of death for young African American males in this country is homicide by gunshot. And what's particularly troubling is the fact that it outweighs the next 9 categories combined. You pick it: car accidents, emphysema, heart disease. The fact is that the people who are being victimized by it are primarily African American males. This is a fact. So that when we address this, as I pointed to a young man last week when I was doing, or actually it was this week, doing a press conference, giving a very specific example of somebody who would have been alive today if they were incarcerated instead of being available to be a victim of murder. When somebody asked me about, the incarceration, what I said was, I'm sure that this young man's parents wish that he was incarcerated right now, because the incarceration is temporary. Without a certainty of punishment, the criminal mind is not going to react and stop the behaviors that they're doing. We have examples of gang members, and I believe it was Frank Main did a piece in the Sun-Times last week or 2 weeks ago, where a gang member says, I wish there were mandatory minimums because it would have helped me turn my life around. When they look at the system as a joke, there's something that they can play, they're going to continue to do it. And unless we interrupt that violence significantly with mandatory minimum sentencing, we don't provide a cooling off period, because somebody gets angry because something happened. And if they sit in jail, they're not available to commit the crime or be the victim of the crime. And that's what's really significant here, is while we're looking at the fact that many of the trigger pullers are young African American males, many of the victims are young African American males. And that's a very disproportionate impact on society. And, while I don't have all the programs, I'm a law enforcement official, and I understand this system very well. And it's very, very clear that these things that we're talking about here today can have a very significant impact on saving lives on the streets of any urban city in this country, whether it's Chicago, Los Angeles, New Orleans. In fact, the incarceration rate in New York State, which has all of these principles that we've talked about legislated into law, the incarceration rate is going down as the crime is going down. And I have a pretty good background to make the comparison between what's happening in New York and what's happening in Chicago. And people ask me that every single day. And what I'm telling you here today is the very significant difference in what's happening in New York City versus a city like Chicago.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Representative Neckrits, back in the chair.
Thank you, Representative Williams. Representative Durkin?
Thank you, Superintendent. I'll be very brief. You made a comment earlier that you believe that the illegal flow of firearms in the Chicago area mainly come from the straw purchasers. There was a big expose recently about the gun trafficking coming in from Indiana. What's more of a problem? Is that equally or is it less of a problem than the straw purchases? I'd like to hear your perspective.
The numbers bear out that the number one source of illegal firearms is Cook County, and that's through straw purchasing. And I think the number is somewhere between 35 and 40% of our recovered guns is coming from Cook County. Indiana is definitely an issue. We made a very nice case, if you will, against a man just last year, straw purchasing, guns coming up through Indiana. The fact is, our number one problem is Cook County as far as the facilitation of those guns hitting our streets. And let's make it more difficult. So you have to go to Indiana. And to purchase in Indiana, now you have to get somebody from Indiana with the legal license and so on.
That is a straw purchase in a sense. And what they're doing is that...
Correct.
Yeah. How many... Does Chicago allow for gun shops? Can you sell a gun in Chicago? Is there...
There are no gun shops in the city of Chicago.
How about in Cook County? How many... Do you know?
I'm not sure how many, but I know that there's a lot.
Okay.
There's a number, and they are our primary sources.
Getting back to the trafficking, does your department have a section, an intelligence section, that deals strictly with gun trafficking? Do you know if the Sheriff's Office, the State Police, or ATF, is there a concentrated effort? Is that an area where we need to put more emphasis on?
I think that the answer to your question is yes. We do have a component that does that. We work with ATF. We work with our various law enforcement partners in a task force type fashion to make those cases. And that's the group that made that case that you read about in the Sun-Times. The fact is, we're drinking from a fire hose. We can't possibly keep up with the gun trafficking based on the resources that are there, and I don't know what the right number would actually be. We're looking at right-sizing that as we speak, but that's an area where significant resources would definitely have a positive impact on what's happening also.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Representative Sims?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Superintendent, first of all, let me thank you for all of the hard work that you're doing. And thank you for the work that you and I did together recently in my district. I've had some pretty significant things happening in my district, including a police officer who was recently attacked and robbed at 91st and King Drive. And his service revolver was stolen in that case. So I'm like you, I'm very interested to see where we're going to go on the lost and stolen issue. We've talked a lot today about local law enforcement being involved in the licensing process and making sure that local law enforcement has a say in where we go. There have been some folks who said that the New York process does not work. It sounded to me like you would suggest that that's not the case, that the New York process is in fact working. Would you walk through that with us, that or your feelings about where the New York process and how it can be applied to Illinois effectively?
Okay, let me just start by saying, again, because of my experience there, I can speak to what is working in New York. In fact, that was my job for 7 years. The murder rate in New York City has dropped by about 80% since 1990. And that came on the heels of a number of issues. The first one was a change in the way that we policed, being more proactive, which is being adopted by cities across the country and in fact across the world. But supporting that were what I call reasonable gun laws and mandatory minimums. Something that does not happen in Cook County is getting people prosecuted for an accidental discharge where they shoot themselves, which happens quite frequently. Even when we get a confession, those folks are receiving real minimum sentencing. Conversely, Plaxico Burress spent 2 years in jail for shooting himself in New York. that's the type of thing that really discourages illegal possession of a firearm. That absolutely plays a role in an 80% reduction in the murder rate. Concealed carry in New York State, there is a rather stringent and rigorous process that you have to go through to receive a permit to carry a firearm. It's not because you want to carry a gun. You have to show cause and a reasonable, that a reasonable person would say, yes, you need to have a firearm. Generally, that goes to folks who carry large amounts of cash for their businesses, or other examples similar to that. Retired law enforcement who still have to qualify every single year to ensure that they're adequately trained and have proficiency to carry those firearms. It's a stringent process, and I don't know how anybody could say that it doesn't work when the results are very significant. As I stated, incarceration rates going down while the murder rate is continuing to go down. And just to put it in perspective, the city of Chicago has about 3 times the murder rate of the city of New York. And there's a direct correlation to the number of guns on our streets that is causing that. And if I recall correctly, shortly after Sandy Hook, there was an incident, I believe it was in China, where somebody went on a rampage with a knife and stabbed like 30 or 40 people. None of those 30 or 40 people died because he did not have access to a firearm. Conversely, 26 people died at Sandy Hook. And an ongoing drumbeat in urban centers across this country because of this exact reason. It's going to take us a long time as a society to fix poverty, to fix education, the breakup of the family unit, a lack of religion, or whatever it is that's causing violence in general. But gun violence is something that we could do something about today with reasonability in the gun laws that's going to protect Second Amendment right to bear arms, which I wholly support, while at the same time preventing the flow of illegal guns and punishing criminals who use or possess firearms on our streets. That will have a significant impact, and it's something that we could do today. We don't have to wait for the economy to turn around so that we could get people jobs. We don't have to wait for better parenting. We could do it today.
So it will be your testimony that, with taking into account the realities of Chicago versus the realities of other municipalities, it will be your testimony that give you the tools to allow you to effectively manage the crime rate in the city of Chicago. Would that be a fair characterization?
It's a fair characterization. I would say the support for the structures that is going to facilitate it, which are tools, exactly.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Representative Petty.
Chair. Thank you, Madam Chair. Superintendent, welcome this afternoon. It's a pleasure to see you here. Superintendent, I represent the Englewood community where everyone in this room should know, or if they do not know, has a very high incidence of gun violence. For an example, at Harbor High School last year, 29 students were shot. This is a follow-up to Representative Rebeletti's question, and my concern is the protection of law-abiding citizens, especially in Englewood. What can they do? What are they allowed to do? Can they carry a weapon? Can they not carry a weapon? So, having said that, Representative Rebeletti's question was specific about patrolling. Would you have any objection to the Illinois State Police providing you with additional support, especially in the Englewood community, to help patrol the streets and make those law-abiding citizens feel somewhat more comfortable, if not more protected?
We work with the state police on a number of different levels, generally in a task force type fashion, and that's what I endorse. It's been shown that simply having more police on the street may not reduce gun violence. Many times we have officers who actually view shootings where it's quite apparent that the individual who is engaged in that behavior disregards the fact that they actually could see a police officer in uniform in a marked police car on the scene and actually shoot someone. I had an incident when I was a lieutenant where somebody walked up to a police car and shot somebody in the back of the police car because they wanted to shoot them. Mere presence does not deter crime. It's the strategies and what those officers do when they're there that reduces crime. Now, Englewood is a very significant symbol of gun violence in this country, which is the reason why I chose, with the mayor, obviously, to take on the issue of gun violence in Englewood. And last year, a little over a year ago, we undertook a very significant initiative that reduced the murder rate in Englewood last year by about 40%, which is very, very significant. It's not success, it's progress, because we have much work to do. So those policing initiatives come from strategic targeting, come from intelligent policing strategies, not necessarily from the size of the police department. And what I constantly try to point out to people is that the Chicago Police Department has more officers per capita than any large city in the country. And at the same time, we rank 4th in total number of officers per capita of any city in the country, period, which includes places like Baltimore and Washington, D.C. So it's not even having more officers, it's what they're doing. We have very significant strategies that we've implemented here in my tenure, and we've had strategies that reduce gun violence, the murder rate, basically in half since the early 90s. There were 4 consecutive years where this city experienced 900 murders. I believe it was 91 through 94, or 95, it's somewhere right in that window. And the murder rate in the city has been at about 450 for the last 8 years. Sometimes it's up a little bit, sometimes it's down a little bit. But if we're going to be successful, we're going to need the support of the system, not just better policing. And it's not an excuse, but the fact is, as everybody points out, it's not just about better policing. It's about other things that we need to do. So I would take support in any fashion, but in working with another agency, another law enforcement agency, I'd look to work in a task force type fashion, like on narcotics, which is what we do, or on gang initiatives, not necessarily street patrols.
No, I can certainly understand that, and I appreciate your professionalism and your knowledge of the subject. As an example, Representative Rebeletti and I served on the Interstate Gun Trafficking Task Force together, that we actually studied the flow of illegal weapons into the city of Chicago, where they were coming from. We found that an overwhelming majority of those weapons were actually coming from Mississippi, and I don't dispute your findings that they're actually here in Cook County, but our focus was primarily interstate gun trafficking.
Right.
So having said that, would you reject an offer of the Illinois State Police to come into the Englewood community and provide you with support? I'm not talking about moving Chicago Police Department out of the way. I'm talking about simply as an additional means of support. And the reason why I say that, Superintendent, is that criminals are very brilliant. They figure out ways to maneuver and get around law enforcement. So if you're given a different look, a different strategy, I think that that's something that's at least viable and something to consider. So would you reject the opportunity to have the Illinois State Police come in and provide you with that support?
Yeah, but I wouldn't reject any support. My question, my issue is, what form would that support take? And as far as patrolling the streets, I think that we're okay in that fashion. We could use help in other areas, like you suggest, looking at interstate task forces to help prevent the flow of those firearms from hitting our streets. Because the state police has very limited resources, and I know we're kind of just saying in a perfect world if we were to get that support. I wouldn't look for it in patrol resources. I would look for it in investigative resources.
And the only reason why I say that is that I remember when I was younger growing up, we would see officers, walking the beat. I can't tell you the last time I've ever seen an officer walking the beat in Englewood. And perhaps maybe that may be a deterrent. I don't know if it would or if it wouldn't. But if that opportunity was provided, I can't imagine why you would not want to take advantage of that.
Yeah, well, first of all, stand by. You're about to see a lot of officers walking the beat. It's another strategy.
Hopefully tomorrow.
No, it's not that quick. Close to it, though. The studies on walking the beat show that it's very, very, very expensive, is the best way to put it, in that you don't get the return that you get from radio car patrol. Having said that, there are very specific times that foot patrol is the type of policing that we need to do. It's not a one-size-fits-all. So that commercial areas, for instance, Michigan Avenue, is a place where foot patrol is a very effective method. Also deploying our our mounted unit, our officers on horseback who can look over crowds where there's big crowds and see. As far as walking a beat, it's great for community relations. It's not the most effective method of reducing crime because what it does is actually move the crime rather than correct the condition. It's the interaction, it's the steps that those officers take when they're in those locations where we do our analysis, we determine where there's the highest propensity for gunfire, the times and the places, and we give them the tools like intelligent quality of life enforcement because taking care of those little things prevents the big things. That's difficult to do on foot patrol, but it's easier to do in a police car. So we have to mingle our strategies to really have an effective system.
No, and I would agree with you, Superintendent. And again, that's the issue that I face on a consistent basis from those law-abiding citizens in the Englewood community, especially on issues like conceal and carry. They say, well, if the criminals all have guns, why can't I have mine? How can you not support that proposal? And again, it's a very difficult question to answer for them, and I look forward to working with you and your able counsel, Mr. Gluntz, who's there with you. Thank you.
I appreciate that, sir.
Thank you. I just have some information I'd like to pass along. One of the strategies that you've been very clear about is that you'd like to see something at the back end with the illegal use of a weapon, and that would be something I think that would probably be coming before this committee. After this committee is relatively new to the whole criminal law area since the Judiciary Committees got merged, and I think it's the consensus of this committee that if we are going to do this kind of penalty enhancement or this increased sentencing, that we would definitely want to see data associated with that and evidence of the fact that it will in fact reduce crime and what impact that will have on the criminal justice system. And so I would ask, as you pursue that you, if at such time as you're going to be coming before this committee with those requests, that we see that kind of data, because we do dozens and dozens and dozens of penalty enhancements every year in response to individual incidences, and I think we'd like to try to find a rational way of dealing with them rather than just responding to anecdotes. So.
We will provide data where modern policing is very good at analyzing data and providing it, so we will definitely do that for you, along with anecdotes that will show individual cases.
We have no doubt that there's lots and lots of anecdotes.
Correct.
So, yeah. All right. With that, we very much appreciate your testimony and your willingness to take questions and respond to that. So,
certainly my pleasure. Thank you all.
Okay. For the penultimate panel, we'll call up 6 folks, I think. We have 3 from the Illinois Council Against Handgun Violence. That would be Camila Williams, Ron Holt, and Val Rendell. And then if I could also call up Chicago Citizens for Change, Joy McCormick, Maria Pike, and Yolan Henry are the 3 that I have. So if the 6 of you could step forward. Again, I would ask you to identify yourself for the record, and we will be keeping time as we have for the other witnesses. And our last panel will have one person testifying. Whenever someone is ready, please start.
Well, I thank the members of this committee for allowing me to testify today. My name is Joy McCormick, and I live and work in Illinois. And I'm not only here on the theoretical opinions that people are offering around this room. I'm here because I live with the consequences of these issues every day. These are life or death issues that I live with not only as the founder of Chicago Citizens for Change, but also as a mother who lost her child. My son, Frankie Valencia, was a senior at DePaul University. He was 21 years old. His brother was a senior at Lincoln Park. Our family was a typical hardworking family. We were healthy and we were happy. Frankie was a community leader who was very active in school and social projects around the city, as well as in service projects internationally. He believed in the power of involvement and service to young people. He had worked at the He had worked in Iowa on the Obama campaign for over a year, and he was invited to an internship at the White House. On Halloween Day of 2009, my son Frankie went to a party. This was on the north side of Chicago. A party being given by some college friends. About 20 minutes after Frankie arrived at the party, some kids from the neighborhood who were identified as being gang affiliated tried to get into the party, and they were asked to leave. They actually did so quietly. 10 minutes later, they returned, this time with a K9 semi-automatic weapon, and they opened fire. They left my son with multiple gunshot wounds. He eventually died after long hours of suffering. That was an assault weapon that was purchased on the street for $300. Why did my son have to die? We need to recognize that the victims, the people who are actually living with the consequences of the decisions that are before you today, are real people with real families. Many, many, many of which are innocent victims and not gang associated and not gang affiliated. Since we lost Frankie, over 600 other young people in this city have died from guns and bullets, leaving families just like ours devastated. According to the University of Chicago's crime lab, over 30% of the guns that are used in crimes are purchased legally here in Cook County. The face of the victims, the stories and the lives that we have to live are unthinkable and unbearable. There is no real recovery for any of us. Nowadays, I work with families who have lost children to violence. Imagine the siblings that are left behind who are afraid that they too will die. Perhaps their parents will die. Their parents are left in fear. Why should we have to live in fear of losing our children? As we can see from Sandy Hook and the tragedy with that no area is immune to violence, urban or rural. Shouldn't kids be able to play at parks without having to watch others walk around with guns? Shouldn't we be able to take them to movie theaters, schools, and places of worship without that fear? Of course, we would like to see a delay in conceal and carry being implemented so that further research could be done. But assuming that we're forced to have conceal and carry in Illinois, we ask that common sense safeguards
Ms. McCormick, get the 30 more seconds. Thank you.
be considered to keep guns from entering the illegal market, which would include that the local law enforcement be required to issue any permits, universal background check of all gun sales and transfers, since the transfers are where many of the guns involved in straw purchases come in, that guns are titled like cars, that there is strict reporting to law enforcement where guns are lost, stolen, and transferred or destroyed, that there are strong training requirements for anyone to
Can I ask you to bring your remarks to a close?
Yes. These common sense approaches of handling firearms is an important step. Enough children lost, enough parents burying their children. You never know. Your implementation of conceal and carry in Illinois may save the life of a young person, of someone who's loved right here in this chamber. We need your help, and we thank you for your consideration.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Yolande Henry. I sit here before you as a parent, and I sit here with the rest of the parents that are here. January 24th, of 2009, my daughter, Nova Henry, and my granddaughter, 10 months old, Ava Henry Curry were both killed by a gun that was legally purchased and carried by an attorney. This didn't happen on the street, it happened in their home. I just basically, we want to say that there are so many lives that are taken by guns. If the carry and conceal law is enabled, can you imagine how it will be to walk the streets with people who legally can carry a gun? You don't know how that person will have walked out of that house that day. They may have an attitude. They may have some anger issues. They can be a law-abiding citizen, but at that moment when they have a gun and they are presented with the situation, do you think that they will not hesitate to use that gun without thinking, being fully trained, being fully aware that it is an illegal crime to shoot someone else? However, it does happen. We will begin living in the days like the Wild Wild West of yesteryear, where everyone who walks upon the street and who has a gun determines that they will now solve their issues by shooting one another because they have the right, they have the Second Amendment to bear arms. We also have the right, and our children had the right to live. However, due to this rashness of gun and feeling that you need a gun to protect yourself, they are no longer here. I myself do not own a gun. I do not own a gun for the purposes that I myself, I can still be angry myself. And just because I'm on the street or I'm walking around or I'm in an enclosed situation where someone else has angered me, without me taking a moment to think about it, that gun could be used.
Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. My name is Maria Pike Davis, and I live and work in Chicago. My son, Ricky Pike, was a solid, happy, popular, hardworking young man of 24 years of age. He decided to move with his Lincoln Park High School buddy to popular Logan Square in the north side. I worried that his friend Frankie Valencia had been killed in the same neighborhood 2 years earlier, and so I drove around there without his knowledge to see if it was safe. Eventually, I decided that I was having a case of emptiness syndrome. Ricky was a graduate chef. He worked full-time. He studied online and at Harold Washington. His plan was to transfer to UIC and get his degree in nutrition to add to his culinary skills. He loved sports, played football, and his dream was to become a successful restaurant owner. 2 months after he moved from home, Ricky was shot multiple times with a semi-automatic gun after a night out with friends. He was just trying to park. He needed to take a shower before going to work. I cry when I think of the Lincoln Park class of 2006. Tragedy struck for a second time. I believe I speak for most of us older moms when I say that growing up, I did not encounter the gut-wrenching death through gun violence that our kids see now. When we bring our children into this world, we make a promise of a safe place where we will nurture them to the best of our ability, where they will blossom into someone better than ourselves, with the support of a partner or not, even of the community. That is always our best intention. There are many mothers and fathers around me who are unsung heroes. Unfortunately, there are others who did not fulfill their promises. If it happened to people as far removed from violence as Ricky and Frankie were, then no one is safe. Once again, guns were used, and we must make change, if not for us, for our children. I, like others here, are looking for change in the gun law so that others, like the rest of the class of 2006, can get a chance to live fruitful and successful lives without fear, because it is their right. Cognizant of the determination of the courts to allow concealed carry guns in Illinois, I wish to remind all present that the historical record of the Second Amendment going back to the Supreme Court rulings of 1897 show us that not only there are no absolute constitutional rights, but that the right to keep and bear arms is not infringed by laws prohibiting the carrying of concealed weapons, and at the same time that the right to bear arms is the strongest at home. The states have always recognized the balance that exists between gun ownership and public safety. To that effect, we propose a may-issue system which will allow local law enforcement to conduct background checks covering mental health, criminal history, as well as moral character and representations of proper cause. Proper cause to include carrying out for target practice, hunting, and self-defense, if job requires it or a special need is determined by law enforcement. Prohibit concealed carry guns within our educational and medical grounds and school buses, even if the person carries a permit. Require comprehensive training prior to issuance of concealed carry permit. Report gun sales stolen, transferred, or destroyed. Required insurance. Work with other states and the insurance industry to revamp the background check system so that no one can escape scrutiny prior to issuing a permit. To ban assault weapons and high-capacity ammunition magazines. Lastly, it is my hope that we can add technology to guns, which I heard someone talk about this morning, and so that we can develop a GPS system that cannot be tampered with, maybe digital recognition so that only owners can operate their own guns, like, for example, use of eye recognition, etc.
Ms. Pike Davis, if you can bring your...
Great harm has been caused to our families and friends, and our law enforcement agencies are currently overwhelmed. Each victim, not only the deceased, but their immediate families and friends, can cost the state up to $50,000 a year in social services. There is enormous stress on our manpower, our city, and our state budgets. Gun regulation is a small step toward a much-needed solution for crime and violence in this state. I thank you for listening to my story.
Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, Madam Chair and the committee. My name is Ronald Holt. Just like many of these parents, we all unfortunately have found ourselves in the same unenviable sorority and fraternity, and that is we've lost our children to gun violence, whether laws are in place or not. I spoke with ICHV and said that I need to say a few words on parents who could not be here and just try to be a voice for them as well as my own child. We have Tanya Birch, who lost her son, Dante. We have Dante Smith, and we also have Pamela Bosley, who lost her son, Terrell Bosley. And there's a whole host of parents around this city that grieve and have to endure that loss each and every day. My son, Blair, May 10th, 2007, 16 years old, and keep in mind, every parent that is in an organization or a part of this movement, their children were innocent. Remember the words innocent. They were innocent. Blair boarded a bus, a public conveyor, crowded on the south side. At 103rd and Halsted, a young man carrying a .40 caliber semi-automatic weapon got on that bus and fired wildly several shots, striking 5 students. Blair lost his life protecting a friend. He was 16 years old. That should have never happened. Choices were made, wrong choices were made that day. Earlier in the week, I was asked the question of should public conveyors, public buses be exempt from conceal and carry impacts should they become a part of Illinois. And then earlier I heard a question that if one of those kids or someone on that bus, a law-abiding citizen, would have had a firearm, they could have defended the innocent. no, there would have been more bloodletting on that bus. More people would have been shot. More people would have been killed. Let's use conventional wisdom. We're talking about a crowded bus of a captive audience moving. So when people say there should not be restrictions, when we talk about conceal and carry, there should be restrictions. Should we bear the idea of living with conceal and carry? We have to think civilly. In what areas will this conceal and carry have impact? Where do we want it? Where do we not want it? Definitely not on public transportation. Because plain and simple, people, you conceal and carry in certain areas in the city of Chicago, I guarantee you that there would be more bloodletting. Some people will not research the law if it's put into place. They won't research it properly. They would think, oh, we just have conceal and carry, so we can do what we want to do if we so much as feel verbally threatened, and we can pull a firearm and open up, just like we saw in Sanford, Florida. That can't happen. We have to put laws into place that with civility and a mindset, especially we have the largest gang factions in the country. And when they get a hold of illegal firearms by illegal means, we know what will happen with those firearms, and they find their way to the streets. There's a story right now where there was trafficking from Indiana through straw purchasing. Guns got onto the street. That individual got caught, to the great work of a concerted effort of many law enforcement agencies. So what I'm saying to you is, we need to think this through when we talk about conceal and carry, and think probably has to be amended moving forward if that becomes one of our laws.
30 seconds, Mr. Holt.
Thank you. You just can't say, here it is on the books. Now let's take it and run. There's been amendments to other laws. We have to think civilly. We're going to have to work together on this. Because when I lost my son, that individual should have never had that firearm in his hands. Had certain laws been in place, that individual would have probably never had that firearm in his place to take a life, just like the rest of these parents up here. So we stand together on a lot of issues, especially this conceal and carry. Thank you.
And on one more note,
I'm going to have to end it there. I apologize. First of all, I'd like to say on behalf of the committee, I think our condolences to all of you on your loss. Are there questions from members? All right. Well, thank you very much for being here today and for your testimony. Again, condolences to all of you. We have one final witness, and that would be Todd Vandermeide from the National Rifle Association. So I know Mr. Vandermeide's here.
Madam Chairman, members of the committee, Todd Vandermeide on behalf of the National Rifle Association. Again, I want to thank you for this opportunity to present some rebuttal testimony and talk about a couple of things I've heard. This morning, as Representative Durkin alluded to, the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals turned down the en banc request from the Attorney General. And in the opinion at the bottom of page 5, it states very clearly, the panel majority opinion is now the law of the circuit, and Illinois has 180 days to decide how to amend its laws. I think earlier in the week there was some question about whether or not the federal courts had jurisdiction over this matter, and I would submit to you that they do. And there was even a 2000 Illinois State Supreme Court case of the People versus Nance that quite specifically pointed out that the remedies in the federal courts, if the state doesn't like the answer, and that the state courts were not going to be used as a Ponzi or a ping pong ball in this. With that, I think what struck me the most today was when I heard Chairman Preckwinkle sit there and talk about a privilege. And that's the problem with the majority of the people who don't like the bill that the legislature is charged with crafting. They continue to want to ignore Heller, they want to ignore McDonald, they want to ignore Ezell, Moore, Shepard, Lawson, Gowder. This is a fundamental, constitutionally protected civil right. The right to self-defense, the right to own a firearm. It's not a privilege to be meted out by bureaucratic people on an eeny, meeny, miny, mo. If that's what, certain people want, then I don't think that, Bull Connor was doing that with the civil rights back in the day. That's not the way the Second Amendment is to be treated. It's to be respected like the First, the Fourth, the Fifth. I'm sure that, as the superintendent testified to, that the, some of the restrictions, because it is a fundamental right, are, detrimental to some policing attitudes. But I guess probable cause and having to obtain a warrant are hurtful of some policing attitudes as well. Or maybe we'd like to go back to the days of John Burgess to how we got confessions out of people. Dealing with a lot of things that are in the bill, private businesses can post. That includes hospitals, that includes restaurants. Any private business can post that they don't want people carrying into their establishment. And what I've heard is, you had the Restaurant Association here sit there and say that, well, we want it statewide. There are restaurants in this state that don't want to do that. Not only that, there are national chains that have national policies. Some say we don't like people carrying guns. Some say we'll live under whatever the rule of the state is. If they say no, it's no. If they say it's okay, it's okay. There are national hardware stores and other places like that that have similar policies. But what the opponents of this legislation have consistently tried to do is now say, let's pass a law that looks like a carry law, but is now a regulatory ban, that we keep saying you can't carry here, you can't carry here, you can't carry. And by the time you're done drawing all those circles, you'll be lucky to walk down the sidewalk. But we passed a law to comply with the court decision. And that's not the spirit of the law, nor it is what we intend to work on. Local law enforcement that we've dealt with does not want to administer this. They want a uniform, statewide permit. At least with the FOID card, they recognize that it's issued by one agency. The Illinois Sheriff's Association, who we've negotiated with for over 4 years, they do not want to be the administrators of this law. They want to have it go to the state police. The Chiefs Association is in the last contact we had with them are in the same position. And this would then create an unfunded mandate on those local agencies, which we're always hearing about unfunded mandates on business. There's training required in the bill. The enumerated commercial courses generally run between 8 and 10 hours and sometimes may go a little bit longer depending on how the instructor runs the course. Along with that, you have to pass a range qualification. We plan on introducing an amendment to change the range qualification based on input from law enforcement who has reviewed the past language and said, we think there's a better way to do this.
30 seconds, Mr. Vandermeid.
Okay, this is going to be tough, madam, because there's been a lot of people up here saying a lot of things.
And this is your second opportunity to testify.
There were only 4 of us. With that, duty to inform. Duty to inform a law enforcement officer is in the bill. If you are caught, if you are pulled over, and the minute that individual asks you for an identification on investigatory or Terry stop, you are obligated to tell the officer you are in fact carrying a firearm. Now, whether it's oral, whether you hand them your license, and in a lot of states, there's a duty to inform. The penalties on that vary from a traffic ticket to something more than that. With it, I heard the exchanges between the superintendent and other members of the committee about what are cops supposed to do? Again, cops in every other major metropolitan area do this. I just don't believe that Chicago police officers are trained at that substandard of a level that it's a problem. And I'll be happy, I'll close with this. You guys are about to engage in a debate over gay marriage. It's amazing that we can rocket that piece of legislation through to codify or expand a form of equal protection under the Constitution. But, and certain members of the body think that everybody south of I-80 is some kind of Neanderthal that has to get their mind right on that issue.
Okay.
But now, when it comes to having two appellate court decisions,
Mr. Vandermeyer,
two
you're over
Supreme
a
Court
minute over,
decisions.
so you can talk a little bit more about gay marriage, or you can get to your point and finish.
I think some other people who don't like this issue ought to get their minds wrapped around that the Second Amendment is a fundamental, constitutional, protected civil right. I'll answer any questions you have.
Thank you, I appreciate it. Questions from members? Representative Drury.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Vandermeer, for your comments. You're a reasonable person, right?
I think so.
Okay.
I ask my wife some nights, I don't know.
I mean, and is it fair to us, you talk about civil rights, I mean, and constitutional rights, right? People also have a right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, correct?
Yes.
And I assume that the NRA's position is the NRA does not want innocent people, some of these family members' children, doesn't want innocent people to die. Is that fair?
Correct.
And if there are steps that can be taken that we as a panel can take that can protect innocent lives, I assume you would agree that those steps should be taken.
It depends on what type of infringement on a fundamental right you want to get to that point.
Okay, so I just want to make sure I understand what you're saying here. So if there's steps we can take to protect innocent lives, there may be things you don't want us to do that.
I think that your interpretation of how you think you're going to protect somebody versus what actually works in practicality are probably going to be a difference of opinion.
Okay, my question was simpler, sir. My question was, if there's steps that we can take that will protect innocent lives, would you agree that we should take those steps?
Depending on how they infringe on a fundamental constitutional right. I'm going to disagree with your premise.
Okay, so your answer is no, we should not take certain steps to save innocent lives.
Would it help people if we did it away with the Fourth Amendment and the requirement for search warrants?
Sir, I'm asking simple questions. I'm just trying to get answers to understand what you're saying.
I'd ask the ladies and gentlemen in the audience to refrain from making comments about the questions. The representative has a right to ask his questions.
I assume, sir, that you, me, and the people in this room, we don't want deranged, psychotic people running around with guns. Is that fair to say?
Correct.
And when they do, when that situation happens, when they end up at a school, at a movie theater, it actually makes the position that you're promoting harder to promote, right? Because you have these people that have mental health disabilities or mental health issues that get access to guns, and it hurts your cause, doesn't it?
Any criminal that misuses a firearm, they try to use and reflect on the average gun owner. Yes.
Right. And you're aware, I'm sure, that the Auditor General back in April of 2012, he issued a very lengthy report talking about the FOID card system, correct?
I drafted that resolution to ask for the audit.
Okay, it was the Firearms Owner Identification Card audit, correct?
Yep.
That's what the FOID card is. And in that report, the Auditor General found that in Illinois, out of the 102 counties in Illinois that are supposed to report mental health disorders to the ISP, the Illinois State Police, only 3 of them were doing that. Is that right?
That's what the Auditor General found, but I think there was some discrepancy with the state police on that audit.
Okay, but the Auditor General's report, which has been published, found that only 3 out of 102 actually were reporting, correct?
That's what he wrote, yes.
Okay, and of those 3 counties that were reporting, he found that almost half of those reports were inaccurate or incomplete. Correct?
I believe so.
Okay, so we have 3 counties that are reporting, and half of their reports are actually inaccurate or incomplete. Is that right?
I believe that's what he wrote in his report.
And that only 30% of firearm owner identification cards that I, as a prosecutor, worked hard sometimes when we prosecute people, they're supposed to take those cards away. Only 30% of those cards that are supposed to be taken away are actually being taken away. That's what the Auditor General found, correct?
Yeah, I believe the district attorneys and the ASAs across the state and the judges are failing the people of Illinois repeatedly.
I appreciate your opinion, but what they found was only 30% of those FOID cards are being taken away, correct?
I think so, yes. I haven't read the report in about 6 months.
Okay. And his conclusion was that he found that the FOID program is limited in protecting the public safety.
Yes.
And he also found, well, the FOID card doesn't just go to Illinois databases. It's actually reported to NICS, right, which is the federal database maintained by the Federal Bureau of Investigation.
I don't know about how they interconnected to Representative.
Okay, well, I can read to you what the Auditor General said, and you can tell me if you agree or disagree. He said that in addition, because many of these Disqualifying conditions are also required to be reported to the Federal Bureau of Investigation's National Instant Criminal Background Check System, which is used by other states when individuals purchase firearms. The safety of the general public as a whole is at risk. That's what he found, correct?
If that's what he wrote.
Okay, so Illinois' lack of ability to enforce its FOID card program not only is endangering people in Illinois, but we're endangering people throughout the rest of the country, according to the Auditor General, correct?
If that's your conclusion, Representative, I don't know.
It's not a conclusion. I'm asking you a question, sir.
Asked and answered. If that's what the Auditor General wrote, that's what he wrote.
Okay. And this bill that you say that people are trying to get around, this bill doesn't have any waiting period in it before a license is issued to allow the Illinois State Police and the county clerks and the state of Illinois to get its system in gear in order to be able to correct all of these problems that the Auditor General has found.
Oh, no. We're going to implement a law by June 9th.
Right. So this bill, despite all of these infirmities that we've just gone through, this bill does not allow anyone to have a waiting period to fix the known problems with the system before someone can go purchase a concealed or apply for and receive a concealed carry permit, correct?
If you're saying that should there be a delay until the system is perfect before we even enter into, doing what the court said, there is no delay in the implementation of this. If that's what you're asking, there is no, they've got 9 months to get a system up. We had that argument 2 years ago. You weren't here for it. But we had that argument, and we asked everybody then, here, let's do this. We put forward the resolution on the audit of the FOID system because I'm one of the guys that gets the complaints daily about people who can't get their FOID cards processed because they're in that 70,000 person backlog. And over the last couple of years, either, the governor has refused to fund that part of the agency at the appropriate level. We even asked for supplemental authority language in the last bill you guys voted on a couple weeks ago to help get this process up and running. And the governor's office refused to submit it to the legislature. So I can't be responsible, nor our organization, for the financial mismanagement of the state by the governor of the state of Illinois. Nor can we be required, I can't make the circuit clerks do their job. That's a function of government. I'm not the king of Illinois, I'm a lobbyist. I can ask to help write laws to make it better. We supported laws on making more reporting on mental health issues. But if the clerks of the courts, the assistant state's attorneys, and the governor of this state aren't going to do their jobs, please tell me how you expect me to fix that.
Sir.
Ladies and gentlemen, no more demonstrations.
Sir, my microphone's working, correct? So you hear the questions that I'm asking?
Oh, I heard it.
Okay, so when I ask a question, I'd appreciate the courtesy if we could just answer the questions. Okay? Thank you. Now, my question is simple. Is the NRA willing to wait for the Illinois State Police and the county clerks to make a statement that they are prepared to handle the applications coming in and enforce the laws, and that they have a system in place that can adequately deal with the issues that the Auditor General found before any implementation of a concealed carry law goes into place?
It's not up to us. The Seventh Circuit has put the timeline in place.
Is the NRA willing to wait?
If you think that we should wait one more day so we can have another Mary Shepard, if you think we should wait another day to have another victim.
Sir, is the NRA willing to wait? It's a yes or no question.
We want the law implemented in the court's timeline.
So the NRA is not willing to wait?
We're going to ask that the court enjoin the state if we don't have a law by June 9th.
And I'm saying if you have a law, and in the law it says that we need to wait to issue a permit until the proper procedures are in place to make sure that we're not only protecting the citizens of Illinois, but of the whole country, is
the application, because we're not, Representative, if you want to
Sir, then I'm going to take your lack of an answer as a no. Unless you want to dispute that, I'm going to take the lack of answer as a no. The NRA is not willing to wait
We
to
think
protect
it ought to be
lives of
implemented.
Illinois and lives of the people of the United States.
We think that everybody ought to be protected, including the Mary Shepherds of the world.
Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Rebeletti.
I find that a very interesting line of cross-examination, but I think each witness should be treated with the same respect, and I respect the ability of any representative to ask the questions the way they'd like to. But I was looking at a document, and this is not a question, Mr. Vandermeer, but from the Illinois Association of Court Clerks. Because I talked to my circuit clerk, Chris Katch-Rubis, who represents the second largest county, as to why they were not in compliance. One, I asked him if he was in compliance. Number two, I asked him if he's not in compliance, why. And if you look on page 2, 99 counties believe that they don't have the ability to forward the information because it's at the direction of the court, of the judge. And I've talked to Chairman Neckritz about making sure any legislation that we pass regarding this issue has that. I don't think any of us here don't want the circuit clerks of this state not to report any valuable information in taking away firearms from people who are mentally ill, who are convicted felons or misdemeanors, if we exclude those people. So I want to make sure that it's part of this record, and I'm sure at some point the county circuit clerks will, I know that Chairman Neckritz has told me that they will have a chance to testify. I think that's important to do, that it's not that 99 circuit clerks aren't doing their job, because obviously if they weren't, we could have the Attorney General file a writ of mandamus to ask them and require them to do their job. But that being said, I have a couple of questions for you, Mr. Vandermeer, regarding one being lost and stolen. And I've had this conversation with the superintendent, with others, and can you give me your thoughts on the lost and stolen issue, is why you don't support lost and stolen?
First off, we think that it simply tees up a law-abiding gun owner in a gotcha situation. And as I alluded in the last time I was before the committee about an individual who tried to do the right thing but still had 4 CPD officers knocking on his door because his local police department would not take the report. Along with that, the bill the superintendent is promoting isn't just lost or stolen, it's any transfer. That's a registration system of every firearm in the state every time it moves. We have never supported it. We never will. Let's remember that it was a registration system that led to Chicago's handgun ban because they closed it down. And for 30 years we lived under a handgun ban until the Supreme Court said otherwise. Every time we've seen registration systems used, they've been abused. New York sat there and said, oh, you have to register your firearms. Then all of a sudden they enacted a new ban and all those individuals got notices, surrender your guns, move them out of state, or weld them up, make them permanently inoperable. Same thing happened in California. So it's not just lost or stolen. But in Maryland, we've seen a unique thing. There was one individual out in Maryland that he every 9, 12 months would have a break-in. And 12 or 15 guns would be gone, and he'd file a police report. And then he was off the hook. He was actually fencing them. Which also brings into the question that, years ago, Dave Savini, an investigative reporter in Chicago, did a expose on the CPD. Found over 900 firearms were missing from their inventory. A couple of those firearms that were supposed to be in the evidence lockup ended up at crime scenes. The CPD has refused to this day to return over that report. It would be very interesting to see what their report actually detailed as to how a gun that is supposed to be in an evidence lockup ends up at a murder scene. The other part about lost or stolen, Representative, is just, like I said, it's a gotcha situation. And I don't see, and the bill also contains provisions to remove or revoke a fundamental constitutional right for failure to report a property crime. Now, what's the penalty for not reporting a rape in the state of Illinois? If somebody's not going to be criminally charged or held liable for a sexual assault that they failed to report, then how do you remove a fundamental constitutional right for failure to report a property crime?
Let me direct your attention also to straw purchasing, just briefly. I know that we partnered with the NRA and the City of Chicago to pass the straw purchaser bill, and I remember being interviewed and talking about the fact that we were actually able to put the NRA and the city of Chicago together, which usually have not seen eye to eye on a number of issues. What else do you think we can do to stem the tide of illegal firearms through straw purchasers, or what would you see that we could work through? I know that you've dealt with this issue quite a bit.
Well, yeah, working with you, we wrote the original Straw Purchase Act that's on the books. And what it is that a straw is when somebody goes in and intentionally lies on a 4473 with the intent to give that to somebody else. That's a crime in and of itself, and we made it a crime here in the state of Illinois, so we don't have to wait on the U.S. Attorney's Office, although under the federal guidelines, it's usually a 5-year mandatory minimum. So we dealt with that. The question is, how's it being prosecuted? Because if you get more than 3 straws and you can show that they've transferred the guns, that now transfers into gun running, which is a Class X. So you can pile on the charges on this stuff if you want to. But I think one of the things that we've been investigating, there's a federal statute on the books that says if you are a prohibited person and you direct somebody else to carry a firearm at your behalf, that's a felony. And I think that we can craft a law like that, because if the senior gang leaders think they're going to have the young ones or the shorties carry the gun because they're only going to go to juvie, they're only going to get 6 months, now we can sit there and throw another charge at them if the state's attorney's office is willing to follow through on it.
Thank you.
Representative Welch.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, Todd. I just have a couple of questions I've asked of other folk who have testified here this morning. I want to ask of you as well. We spoke in Springfield briefly and a couple of different times, and you know, everyone up here is a lawyer, and we've all taken an oath to uphold the Constitution, and we're here today because we're really trying to do our best to make sure we implement a law that is fair and reasonable and constitutional. And we all respect the Second Amendment of the Constitution. My concern, as I said to you in Springfield, is, you know, I represent Maywood and Forest Park and those areas. And Forest Park, for instance, has a huge CTA train station that thousands of people go through every day, including a number of students. Is the NRA really not willing to compromise when it comes to the issue of mass transit?
Again, Representative, I think what happens is you have these people trying to draw out these large circles and create large no-carry zones.
I'm only dealing with mass transit.
We're very much inclined to keep that in the bill to the end. And we think that just because you avail yourselves of public transit, because of your economic status or the way your commute runs, that you should not be deprived of your right to self-defense.
And have you ever been to Forest Park, Illinois?
Yes, I've been through it. I took the train in today.
Through Forest Park?
Not today. Today I rode the Burlington Northern Line, but I've been through Forest Park.
And is it your position here today? The NRA is not willing to compromise on that particular issue with regard to firearms on mass transit?
Not at this point.
That leads me to believe that at some point you could be.
It's going to take a very big, our answer is no, it's something that needs to be in the bill. You know, sometimes you never say never, but I don't think that, I don't think it's a point we're going to move on.
I think it's fair to say you heard a lot of testimony here today, and we're deeply concerned about firearms on mass transit. The other issue that I wanted to ask your opinion on is with regard to law enforcement officers. Since we are the only state in the country that does not have concealed carry, I have to imagine that you have some idea how it's done in other states. What is a reasonable expectation of those who are lawfully carrying a firearm when they are encountering a law enforcement official?
The duty to inform language that is in the bill was the subject of negotiations between us, the sheriffs, and the Chiefs Association. Now, there are many people in my organization as members who don't like it. There's a very viral video of a bad encounter with a law enforcement officer who wouldn't let the motorist get 2 words out edgewise to let him tell, I have a firearm, I have a permit, despite him handing the permit. The video went viral. The officer was fired for his conduct. We made an agreement with those law enforcement groups. We think the duty to inform language that is in there is fair and reasonable for I think the bigger question is...
We have a number of bills that we have to consider. Are you referring to which one, 997?
997.
Okay.
I think the other question is, what is the police training board going to do to update their training modules for law enforcement officers as to how they should be handling? Most cops I know tell me that if you don't approach every car as if there's a gun in it, you're asking for trouble. As a former military police officer, I understand that. By the same token, I think that there are some police officers in the state that are much more comfortable with people having guns, and in different states they react differently to it. Sometimes the cops say, where is it? Don't touch it. Don't make any sudden moves. Sometimes the officer may take custody of the firearm, although a lot of them don't want to be handling loaded guns if they don't have to be. Sometimes, they'll ask the guy to put it on the dash so they can keep an eye on it. I think the real question is, how are we going to make sure, it took us 4 years working with the sheriffs and with the chiefs to break through the mentality that it's been 60 years of no, this is not the way we operate. And I think now we have to get through that and look at some realistic situations. I know how I act when I'm in a vehicle, and if I'm pulled over, dome light goes on, hand stay on the steering wheel, no sudden moves. It's common sense. I think that when we come to the general training aspects as to how people react to law enforcement encounters, it's a two-way street. Law enforcement doesn't need to overreact, and the permittee doesn't need to be making, sudden or other moves that are going to give the officer a different theory. But one of the savvy old-timers I've talked to, I asked him, how do you tell the good guy from the bad guy? And he says, 9 times out of 10, the good guy's got a holster. The gangbangers generally aren't spending $100 on a Galco rig or anything else. They're sticking it in their pocket or whatever, trying to hold it up with their belt. That's good police work.
Thank you, Todd.
Representative Williams? No? Okay.
Thanks again, Todd. Just want to know if you could very briefly address the testimony of Superintendent McCarthy earlier about the training requirements. Like anything that you practice or have training for, some of us are better at things than others. I imagine for some people 8 hours might be sufficient. For some people they're never going to be able to safely handle a weapon. And how do we make that distinction in the training requirements?
Well, I think there's two things here, Representative. One is that there's not only the classroom portion of it, there's the range portion of it. And you're not going to be able to get the permit until the range officer signs off on the training requirement that, one, you qualified and you met the criteria there. So the range officer is going to have to feel comfortable putting his name on that certificate. It's the way it works in a lot of other states. And I see it working in a lot of other states. We haven't seen a single state make a concerted effort to repeal a carry law once it's been enacted. I don't think Illinois is going to be any different. Now, I recognize that when you start carrying a gun in public, it takes on a different connotation, but let's remember, in order to be able to use the use of deadly force in self-defense in one own's home on one own's land requires absolutely zero training. And so I think when you start talking about 8 hours, we're not cops. We're not there to, act as cops. It's not citizens arrest. It's none of that. You have a firearm on your person for the protection of yourself and somebody in your close proximity. Those rules are fairly well established.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Sims, quickly.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Madam Chair. Todd, I want to talk a little bit about the home rule preemption. Listening to President Preckwinkle and then Superintendent McCarthy, I think both would acknowledge that there are circumstances that are unique to Cook County and the Chicagoland area that may not present themselves in other areas. So being able to have the tools to manage the process for a Chicago or Cook County would make the implementation of the act more effective for them. In a previous conversation, I believe that you and I talked about your inability, or the NRA's inability, to give on the preemption issue. Having heard some of the testimony today, has that changed at all, or what's the NRA's position on the home rule preemption?
You're right. Chicago and Cook County are special. They are especially abusive to the rights of gun owners. And we don't think that giving them any more leeway or discretion is going to be helpful to that. Let me give you an example. Just a week ago, an individual who drove into the city to pick somebody up, take them out shooting, drove them back into the city, was pulled over for having a taillight out. Had an NRA sticker on the back window. Was asked by the Chicago law enforcement officer if he had any guns with him. And he said, yes, I just came from the range and dropping somebody off. There were 3 in the trunk, a rifle, a 9mm handgun, and a .38. He was detained, arrested, and taken in and charged under Chicago ordinance for having unregisterable guns. He's not a resident of the city. He's not obligated to have his guns. And when you see abuses like that...
But by the same token, Todd, for individuals who are residents of the city of Chicago or of Cook County, and they do not register their guns, they are obligated to do that, and there's nothing wrong with that. If the citizens of Cook County and their elected officials, or their citizens of the city of Chicago and their elected officials have determined that that's what's in their best interest, I don't understand why the NRA is unwilling to give on that issue.
The issue is that it's a fundamental constitutional right that's going to be enforced with one standard. We don't have different standards for search and seizure. We don't have different versions of the Fifth Amendment and your right to, remain silent. And this is a fundamental constitutional right, Representative.
But for every may issue state, that issue, the issue of whether or not the local law enforcement, be that local law enforcement, city or county, or the state law enforcement, has the ability to determine what is permissible. And again, I'm just trying to understand how we're going to ultimately get to a place where this bill, this law is going to work for everyone. And it seems like it's going to be a point of contention for all of us.
Yeah, I understand that, but let's think about a May issue bill under Rob Blagojevich. He'd have been asking $10,000 campaign checks for permits.
Well, Rob Blagojevich is no longer governor of the state of Illinois, so I mean, I don't want to talk in hypotheticals here. I'm talking about, as Superintendent McCarthy sat there at that table and said we've had 3,500 guns that have been stolen. In my district, and I would imagine that many of the districts of members who are from the Chicagoland area, they've had child and student after student and person after person who've been the victim of gun violence. So we are trying to get to a point where we respect the Second Amendment. I think Representative Welch said it very, very well. We all respect the constitutional rights and fundamental rights, but it's at the end of the day, it's also about the Constitution of the state of Illinois that says we are charged with protecting the public health and safety, and I think that's the discussion we need to be having also.
I understand that. The question becomes, how do you sit there and tell Otis McDonald he's a second-class citizen because he lives within the city of Chicago? You just heard the superintendent, if my ears were right, testify that it wasn't people with FOID cards that he was picking up that were the problem. And I don't think it's going to be people with carry permits that you pick up that are shooting out street lights or doing other things, because we're not the problem.
Well, again, I would agree with that. And if the point is we are trying to get to illegal gun use, then I don't understand why the NRA. I don't understand the NRA's opposition to the preemption anyway.
What business does the superintendent of the city of Chicago need deciding who gets to exercise their rights or not?
It's not about the exercising of the rights. It is about. Thank you all. I appreciate that. But at the end of the day, it is about making sure that we have laws that are in the best interest of the public. That's the bottom line.
I'll agree with you on that, Representative, but it's a fundamental right. You either get the right or you don't. Maybe the people in Englewood, in Representative Tepetti's district, shouldn't have the right to remain silent. Maybe we should do away with, and give them warrantless searches in those areas. It's a right or it's not. That's how we view it. We think it's a right that deserves a single uniform standard across the state. No, whether you're from Cairo or Chicago or from Moline to Lansing. It's a fundamental right. That's the position we come from. That's what the Court of Appeals said. They said it's a fundamental right. And all that does is to say, okay, Chicago, you can have your own permitting system. We've seen how abusive they've been to this point already after McDonald. Now, to just give you a point, remember under the Chicago ordinance, you can't take your handgun or other firearm outside the four corners of your home and be in compliance with the ordinance. You can't go to your front porch. You can't go to your detached garage. Now they've got to amend their ordinance because the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals just said something different. But that's how abusive the city is. And since they haven't been shown to be good actors or good faith participants with what the court is, if I remember correctly, Justice Rovner said they have thumbed the municipal nose at the Supreme Court. We're not going to give them that chance again.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I think we have no one else seeking recognition, so I think we've appreciate everybody's participation here today. I would announce that the next subject matter hearing on the issue of firearms will be this Thursday, February 28th, in Springfield at 9 a.m., and the subject matter will be assault weapons. So that will be the next hearing.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, for your indulgence.
Thank you all very much, and the Judiciary Committee shall be adjourned.